was amazing.
Did you like my intro? We weren't even planning to do an intro.
Do you sing only in the shower or outside of the shower too?
Well, I should only sing in the shower, according to all who've heard.
Disagree.
Oh, yeah?
You just sing on your show.
I do, but that's purely, talk about denial, repression, projection. Like, I deny that I can't sing, so I project a terrible voice to the world. Everybody, Dr. Rachel Zoffness, PhD, is back on the show, one of my most requested return guests.
Wow.
She is UCSF faculty. She's a pain psychologist specializing in chronic pain and illness, and you're a pain educator faculty at Dartmouth. So you teach other healthcare professionals about pain, particularly the aspects of pain that are biopsychosocial, which are all aspects of pain.
Totally. And that word sounds really complicated and scary most of the time for most people.
Make it less scary for me. Explain what you mean when you say that.
Okay, let's talk about it. So we are under the impression that most health conditions, including pain, are purely biomedical or purely biological. And by that, I mean all pain is of the body, is this impression that we have. So if your back is hurting, it's easy to believe that your pain lives exclusively in your back. By the way, I'm going to answer your question in a roundabout way, but I promise you I will answer it.
Typical PhD psychologist, always up in my face with the nuance and the details, because you cannot discuss this complex subject without that.
So right, and I am a nerd and I am committed to science, and I want to make sure that when we're talking about complicated things, we do it in a way that is A, scientific, B, factual, and C, at least for me, as easily digestible by people as possible, because I think a lot of people think of pain as this really complicated thing that's really hard to understand, but it's not. It's not out of anyone's wheelhouse. So in general, we think about health often as like a biological thing, like it's something that's just happening to your body. But as you said, pain and all health is actually biopsychosocial. So what that means is, again, we tend to believe that pain lives exclusively in our body. Your back hurts, you go to the back doctor, you have procedures and medications to help your back. What science tells us is that that actually is not true. Pain does not live exclusively in your back. Pain is not purely a biological problem. One reason we know this is because of this thing called phantom limb pain.
Do tell.
I'm going to tell. Phantom limb pain is this condition where an accident survivor or a trauma victim loses a limb, like an arm or a leg, and they continue to have terrible pain in the missing body part. So you can have no leg and continue to have terrible leg pain. And what that tells us is pain must be constructed somewhere else, right? Because if pain were constructed in the leg, no leg should mean no pain. And the fact that you continue to have pain in a body part that isn't there means that pain is actually constructed by this part of the body called the brain. And the really cool thing about the brain is that it's comprised of all these different parts that are always working in unison, working together. So what we know about pain is there's no one single pain center in the brain. There's lots of parts of the brain that process pain. One of the parts of the brain that processes pain is your limbic system. Doctor, what is the limbic system?
I'm on the spot. The limbic system is our more primitive part of the brain that manages emotions and unconscious things and that sort of thing. I call it if we're going to use this analogy, it's the elephant. I actually locked my focus. It's the elephant, this unconscious, huge, ancient part of our brain.
Yeah, your limbic system, exactly right, is your brain's emotion center. So what that means about pain, according to neuroscience, is that pain is both physical and emotional 100% of the time. And I'm going to say that again because it's so important. All pain that you have in your body that you think of as physical pain is also emotional 100% of the time. So the emotions you feel affect the sensations in your body, always. If you're stressed or anxious, or if you're depressed, or if you're angry, or if you've experienced trauma, your pain is going to be amplified. Yeah, I know there's so many things to say. You go.
Oh.
I know, it's rich. It's rich.
Okay. So already we violated the prime directive, which is all pain is medical, treated with a molecule or an agent. There's a physical cause for all pain exclusively, and the mind is just responding to that physical cause. Well, if you take the physical cause away in the form of an amputation, there's still pain, and not only pain, but the suffering around pain with phantom limb.
Yes.
Then you mentioned things like trauma, anxiety, fear, those kind of the emotional state, the limbic part of the limbic brain. And that is a perfect segue into the topics we're going to talk about, because we want to talk about things that are uncomfortable to talk about for many doctors, because they can't wrap their mind around it in a reductionist way, like fibromyalgia or complex regional pain syndrome or PTSD or, heaven forbid, anxiety and depression. So we've kind of framed what we want to kind of dive into.
Yeah.
So if things are biological, psychological, limbic, emotional.
Yep.
Remind us again, we talked about this last time, the social component.
Totally.
Yeah.
So I'm so glad you circled back around. I was going to do the same. So this biopsychosocial model of health, pain, but also all health, tells us that there's 3 domains of health we need to look at all times, and that the health condition, whether it's depression or pain or trauma or diabetes, it doesn't matter, lives in the messy middle of those 3 domains. So there's bio, the biological domain of health. So that's system damage and tissue dysfunction, other way around. Tissue damage, system dysfunction. I knew I would get that right eventually. Immune function, it's diet and sleep and exercise, all those physical things that are very, very, of course, important to health. But then there's the psychological domain, which has so much stigma around it, drives me crazy as a pain psychologist. We can talk about that all day.
Oh, yeah.
And then there's the social or the sociological domain. And if you think about it as these 3 bubbles, there's bio, there's psych, there's social. It's like if you're only focusing on the biological bubble of health, you're missing 2/3 of the pain problem, or you're missing 2/3 of the human experience of health. So in the psychological domain, there's a lot of different things. And unpacking it sort of could take us 17 episodes. But there's thoughts. So how you think about your body, and just any thoughts you have actually amazingly immediately affect your physical body. So if you start thinking, for example, panicky, scared thoughts, your entire sympathetic nervous system will go into fight or flight, and you will feel the physical cascade of things that happen when you think a thought. Your thoughts affect your body 100% of the time. Also in the psych bubble, we have coping behaviors. So if you ask 10 different people living with chronic pain how they're managing their pain, they'll give you 10 different answers. And how you act, of course, how you behave affects the pain you feel. If you're inside all day, not moving, that's going to affect your body a certain way. And then also there's so many things. Oh. Right. And then there's the social or the sociological domain, which is the one you asked about. So the social domain includes social behaviors, so family, friends, if you're a kid, school, media and social media, work. And then there's socioeconomic, so your access to care, your ability to afford treatment, culture, religion, your environment around you. Of course, we know environment affects health. Lifestyle, there's a whole domain of medicine called lifestyle medicine.
It seems like your socioeconomic domain would also put you on the locomotive railway tracks to be hit by the train of trauma more likely. Yep. In some ways.
Yep.
And so it's this complex web, which, by the way, I forgot to mention this. This is Rachel's book, and you can find it on Amazon. I'll put a link. It's outstanding, and it outlines a lot of this stuff so that you don't have to, remember it for the test.
Yeah, no, there's not going to be a test today.
Good. That's good.
Yeah.
So biopsychosocial.
Right.
Now, you said a few things that I want to dig into. One of them is this idea of the psychological stigma component of pain. So how many doctors have said things like, oh, this is all in your head, or this is mind-generated, this somatization of what's going on, so you just need to take an antidepressant and chill because I can't find anything wrong with you. Or off the record, when doctors are talking to each other or scribbling notes to each other, oh, such and such is crazy, it's crazy pain, it's not real, it's status hystericus, right?
Yeah.
How do you think about that?
I think that's a massive problem with chronic pain. A lot of people with fibromyalgia and other chronic pain conditions have gotten that message, like, oh, you're just anxious, or this is all just in your head, or really this is just depression. And I think it's so, not only is it stigmatizing, but it's dismissive. It's this sense that this experience that you're having doesn't matter, and you should just be lumped into the pile of crazy people.
Crazy people.
And I think what that does is it further separates out this idea that either you have physical pain and you see a physician, or you have emotional pain and you see a psychologist like me, but that's not how pain works at all. Pain is always both physical and emotional. So if you actually want to treat pain, you need to be targeting all the things you're feeling, all the things you're thinking, all the ways you're behaving or managing your pain, and of course your physical body. But in Western medicine, we separate these two out. And so the message we give to our patients, and by the way, to physicians in training, is if you have a patient who is anxious and depressed, which happens to a lot of people, then just lump them in the mentally ill category, and maybe that will explain away this physical stuff that's happening. But it's always all together.
It's a reductionistic approach where we reduce a complex problem to one of its components.
Yeah.
And so, I like to think of it in a four square. It's a Ken Wilber thing. Like you have I, internal experience. You have we, intersubjective experience. You have it, the body, and you have its, the bodies and the technical and socioeconomic stuff around us. And those four quadrants comprise all of reality. Every single aspect of reality, but in medicine, we tend to go it as the only quadrant and ignore the internal, we ignore the intersubjective, and we ignore the socioeconomic. I think it's partially because how we're trained, partially because we don't have resources, partially because we're not paid to do it, partially because we're not trained to do it, all those other things, right? Has that been your sort of vibe on it?
Are you a philosopher?
I play one on TV, and I did sleep at a Holiday Inn Express last night, so...
Good answer. Good answer.
Why do you ask?
Because you sound like one.
Yeah.
And it's impressive.
They talk like
impressive.
that. It's all obfuscation because they don't really know what they're doing. So they use terms like, well, our intersubjective we space that we've generated, Rachel, you would just say, yeah, that's called the doctor-patient relationship or the therapeutic alliance or,
I think at the end of the day, we're both saying exactly the same thing, which is health is this really complicated thing that has been distilled down to this biomedical model where we only look at body parts and then we only treat those body parts, oftentimes exclusively, but primarily with pills and procedures. And actually, if we want our patients to get well, what we need to be doing is looking at the whole person. And whole people are complicated. But the thing about the whole person is, no matter where in your body the pain is, your brain is connected to your body 100% of the time. So whether it's fibromyalgia and you have like 18 points of pain or 22, or whether it's complex regional pain syndrome, or whether you're one of those people who's living with chronic daily stomach aches, and we should talk about that too. The brain is connected to the body 100% of the time. Everything affects everything. So if you are someone living with pain and you feel like your physician is only focusing on this biomedical stuff, one thing that we can do is start opening that up and try and reduce the stigma around that by talking about the role of the brain in pain and sort of weave in these other treatments that we know are effective for pain, like what I do, which is cognitive behavioral therapy, or treatments like biofeedback, which we can talk about, which connects the brain and the body and helps you navigate the physical sensations that come about when we're thinking stressful thoughts.
What's interesting about all this too, these therapies, is that they do change a locus of control too, don't they?
100%.
Yeah. I mean, because normally our locus of control with pain is external and out of our control. I'm the victim of this pain. And the thought, what you mentioned about thought inflecting with pain, they're one continuum. Our thoughts generate a lot of the anxiety projection future component of pain. Like, is this pain ever going to go away? How's this going to affect me? I'm going on vacation. What's going to happen? Will my spouse or partner leave me with this pain? And those projections then add in a feedback, as you mentioned, biofeedback in a malproductive way. So you're saying there are ways to actually hack that by looking at thought, cognitive behavioral therapy, intervening that way, and looking at biofeedback loops and saying, oh, you know what? Actually, we can change the locus of control to here and actually do something beneficial for pain.
And I love the word hacking, especially in like the Bay Area. I feel like everyone's trying to hack everything. Like
we're all neurohacking.
Yeah, we're like hacking health and meals and
Soylent.
Orgasms.
Can you hack an orgasm?
Oh, I don't even want. There was a cult that was attempting to. It went south. We can talk about that another time.
No, I think we need this is one of those things where I need it's like I learn by doing. And
oh my God.
But no, that's so. But it does actually points to this. There's a reductionist component in the Bay where it's like, well, I can just neuro hack my way through anything.
Right. Well, the interesting thing is the hack for pain is undoing the mismessaging that has happened. Right. The hack for pain is undoing this stigmatized separation between emotions and body, physical and emotional, and merging it into one thing again. That actually is the hack. Because what happens and what research shows is when you target the catastrophic and terrified thoughts that understandably accompany chronic pain, so many people with chronic pain and chronic illness are suffering and struggling understandably and are scared about the future and are scared about their bodies and are scared of their partners leaving them, like you said, because of their pain and they're scared about losing work and income. They're scared about, not being able to play with their kids, or losing their sex life. There's so many things that naturally and normally come along with living with chronic pain. But when you merge the two and you treat the thoughts and you treat the emotions, shockingly or not shockingly, what happens is that, and this is shown across neuroscience, is that pain volume goes down too. So if we actually want to hack pain, we have to treat the whole person. We have to treat the thoughts. We have to treat the emotions. We have to treat coping behaviors. We cannot just treat the back or the arm. It will not work.
Yeah. But by the way, you said pain volume.
Yeah.
Remind me what that is.
Yeah. So there's a metaphor that I have for talking about how pain works. And again, I'm this neuroscience nerd because science makes the world make sense to me. And I was a kid with chronic pain, and I've had bouts of chronic pain as an adult. And I think it's so important and so empowering for people to understand pain. And it is not beyond any of us. So the metaphor is this. If you imagine in your central nervous system, which is your brain and your spinal cord, that you have what I'm going to call a pain dial. And the pain dial is like the volume knob on your car stereo. You can turn it up and you can turn it down. And there's lots of things that adjust pain volume. So one thing that can change pain volume, this is not going to shock you, is stress and anxiety changes pain volume. Another thing that changes pain volume is mood and emotions, negative emotions in particular, but also positive emotions, change your pain volume. And 3 is attention, or what you're focusing on. And this maps onto pain neuroscience. So I'm going to tell you how.
Can I ask one question though?
You can ask.
So when
you
say attention, it's interesting because there's distraction, and then there's immersion in the actual field of pain. Can you speak to that a little bit?
I can, but only after I finish.
All right, then I'm writing it down that we're going to come back to that.
You take copious notes.
Yes, copious.
And we'll circle back.
I have my ZDogg MD, hands off my pen, available at supportertribeforlife.com.
I have a question.
Yes.
Can I get a free one for being on the show?
Can. Remind me, I have Health 3.0 flask. I have a ZDogg MD flask. Show them your flask. This thing sounds like a pack of dolphins that are communicating by sonar when you. It's true.
I'm not doing it.
You're not going to demonstrate?
No.
All right. Well, I would demonstrate, but then we'll give each other COVID. Yes, remind me.
You should have disclosed that up front. I've been vaccinated.
I'm triple vaccinated. Okay. I went and got the Sinovac just for fun, just to see if I'd understand Mandarin after getting it.
You cannot drink out of a dolphin. I'm sorry.
So we were on a roll, and we got
pain volume.
Pain volume. Yes.
Right. Volume knob, like a car stereo, and it lives in your central nervous system. I can't tell if this is like a good thing or a bad thing.
Does laughter turn your pain volume down?
Laughter, yes.
It does.
Laughter turns pain volume down.
I feel good laughing.
There is a Scientific American article that's so great about how laughter is medicine for pain.
And cursing as well, I understand, has an analgesic effect.
Cursing has an analgesic effect, and I can tell you why. You get to express and release negative emotion, and when you release negative emotion goes down, and when negative emotion goes down, it turns down pain volume. It's just cathartic to release. I call it tea kettling. I'll tell you why, and then we're going to go back to pain volume.
Yes, but then I'm going to interrupt you one more time because this is important. Go tea kettling.
Yes.
This sounds like a sexual thing that happens on a crazy website that you don't want to subscribe to with actual money. You use Bitcoin, so it's untraceable.
I'm going to ask the audience to question where your mind is at any given moment. There's tea kettles in my mind are absolutely not even remotely sexual, but that's fine. That's good.
Okay.
This is good for me.
All right. Good. We will agree to disagree on that.
That's good. Right. I like it. Okay. So, do you know what would happen to a tea kettle if it didn't have a hole for the steam to come out?
it would become a bomb.
Correct. It would explode. And human beings are the same, and we all know that because we have all seen people explode with emotion that they have not expressed. So we all carry around lots of negative emotion, and it needs to come out of your body because emotions are somatic. By that I mean emotions are physical. Emotions don't just live in your head, they come out in your body. If you've ever had butterflies in your stomach or sweaty palms like me before speaking on a podcast, you know that your emotions come out in your body. However, a lot of us walk around in life suppressing or holding in our negative emotions. Turns out science shows that's bad for your health. Your negative emotions need to come out. They live in your body. They can come out as pain and stomach aches and sweaty palms and vomiting and trigger migraines and all the things we've all experienced that, right? So tea kettling is a word I just made up. I use it with my patients. And the concept of tea kettling is it whistles. There's a release for the steam to come out, and humans are the same. We need to release our negative emotions, and we need to find safe, controlled ways of doing that. So talking to someone like a therapist is a way of tea kettling. Going for a run, taking a hot shower, cursing really out loud, screaming in your car is tea kettling. We have all done things like this. Yelling into a pillow. There's a million ways to tea kettle. I know you have questions. Can I go back to the pain volume before I forget?
Yes, and then we're going to go back to emotion because I love this.
I know. There's so much to talk about. And what's interesting is that we started with pain, and now it's a direct line to like releasing your emotions.
It's all connected. Yeah. Tea kettling. Right. I love that. The next time I do a live show on Instagram, for some reason, Instagram triggers tea kettling from me in the form of cursing.
Yeah.
So and I'll just tell a story real quick. The other day, and this idea of feeling emotion, inhabiting emotion, and letting it pass through you is something we are never trained to do. In fact, we're trained to do the opposite.
That's right.
Don't cry. Don't do this. Don't scream. Don't punch things that aren't human. You can punch humans because apparently that's socially okay. I was meditating in the morning and very open and unguarded, and then so emotions happen when that happens. Then I went right outside and did a show for Instagram, and I was going to talk about masks, and I was going to talk about COVID, and I was going to talk about this. And I found myself going, fucking this, fucking the other thing, and the other thing. And people are like, yeah, all the emojis, yeah. And I'm like, why does this feel so good?
Yeah.
And afterwards, I was like floating, just so happy. And then I realized I probably ruined my career just by doing the show, but I don't care because I don't have a career. So I'm back to you and your pain volume.
Right, but you tea kettled.
And
you felt better afterwards.
I feel dirty because the word tea kettle still sounds so. But yes.
You must know things that I just don't know.
No, I just project. So
Okay.
Thank you for bringing that up and back to pain volume.
Right. Okay. We have this volume knob. It's controlled by lots of things: stress and anxiety, negative emotions, and attention, or what you're focusing on. So specifically, when stress and anxiety are high, and your body is tense and tight, because that's what happens when we're stressed and anxious, and your thoughts are worried, if you think about the pandemic, all of those things are what was happening for all of us. What happens is your brain's limbic system, again, the emotion center in your brain, sends a message to this pain knob, and it turns up pain volume. So when stress and anxiety are high, pain volume is turned up by your brain. The second thing is mood and negative emotions. So when your mood is low and you're miserable and depressed and your thoughts are really negative, and of course this is a thing that often happens when we have chronic pain or illness, your brain, limbic system, sends a message to your pain dial, raising pain volume. So again, pain is amplified and feels worse when emotions are negative. And the third thing is attention. So when you are in bed, at home, missing out on life, not going to work, not seeing your friends, and you're focusing on your pain, your prefrontal cortex, which is another part of the brain that processes pain, sends a message to your pain dial, raising pain volume. So pain feels worse when you're stressed and anxious, when emotions are negative and you're sad and miserable, and when you are focusing and thinking about your pain. But the reason this is good for all of us is that the opposite is also true. So when stress and anxiety are low, which, by the way, is why relaxation strategies and biofeedback and mindfulness can be so effective for pain management, even though those are stigmatized and everybody rolls their eyes, including me. at one point in my life. The reason those are effective is because what they do is they lower stress and anxiety, which turns down your pain volume. Same with mood and emotions. When you are engaged in pleasurable activities, when your emotions are positive, you're feeling grateful, you're feeling happy, you're experiencing joy, your limbic system turns down pain volume, so pain feels less bad. And same with attention. When you are engaged and absorbed in activities, like I often ask my clients, tell me about a time you were so absorbed in some activity you briefly forgot about your pain. That's not magic, but we've all had that experience. And what that is that's your prefrontal cortex sending a message to your pain dial, lowering pain volume. So there are all these ways that we can manage our pain beyond medications, beyond surgeries. They're all in the pain management workbook, actually, so I'm glad you brought it up. I took everything that I was doing in my practice. I'm one of those people that gets very angry about the lack of affordability and accessibility of healthcare. What I do is not affordable to most people. I think that's bullshit. Insurance does not reimburse things like biofeedback and cognitive behavioral therapy and pain psychology in general. I think that's actually like completely unacceptable.
Backwards. Totally
completely backwards.
But they'll pay for the pill. Yeah.
And they'll pay for many, many expensive surgeries, and you can have like 8 back surgeries and that's all covered.
Yeah.
So I stuck everything I did in a book because I want people to be able to afford it.
And I've read the book and it's fantastic. And
Thank you, Z.
we're just going to keep pitching this book because it's awesome. And I've got the link in here. So, okay, so let's bring this back now so let's do some case examples of syndromes that are classically stigmatized by Western medicine.
Yeah.
So let's start with fibromyalgia because this is one, and I've done a couple shows on this. And I'll say some things that seem controversial until you actually look at it as a biopsychosocial disease, which all diseases are.
Exactly.
So I'll say that a lot of patients with fibromyalgia have absolutely real symptoms that you can actually diagnose using criteria. So the first instinct of a lot of healthcare professionals is this is a fake disease, right? Okay, stigma 1. Let's just get rid of that. The second thing is it seems that a lot of people who suffer from fibromyalgia have suffered trauma at some point.
Yeah.
Now, how does that relate to this web that you're describing of pain volume, negative emotion, thought, attention, all this kind of stuff?
Yep. So first things first, I just want to zoom out for a second and say fibromyalgia is what's called a chronic pain condition. And any type of condition that's considered chronic is when you've had pain, believe it or not, for 3 or more months, that is then officially considered chronic pain. Chronic pain has lots of different definitions, and it depends on who you ask, but it's 3 or more months or beyond expected healing time is the standard definition. And fibromyalgia, as people know, usually lasts many years for a lot of people. And it's this mysterious illness. People don't exactly know what causes it. People don't know the treatment. There's like a lot of... and like you said, there's a lot of stigma around it too. So people will often see physician after physician and get lots of different prescriptions or recommendations, and the pain remains. And it used to be that diagnosing fibromyalgia was required that you had pain, I think, in 11 out of 18
Right, there's certain points, and there's other things you can throw in as like minor criteria like sleep disturbance,
and fatigue,
and brain fog. And,
exactly.
Right.
And thankfully that has changed because as anyone with pain knows, you have different pain on different days. So, on Tuesday, you might have pain in 22 body parts, but by Thursday you might only have pain in 8 body parts. Does that mean you don't have fibromyalgia? I mean, it's just like it's not a great criteria for diagnosing a chronic condition.
And it seems like the traumatic component, if it's present,
right? Back to
yeah, it seems like that might relate to something you've talked about before, which is the nature of pain as an alarm signal. Can you speak to that?
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm going to answer that question by asking you a question.
Oh dear.
Yeah. I want you to think of a skill that you practiced over time. You were bad at it, you practiced it, and you got good at it. And let me back up and just say, what I'm going to do with this analogy is explain why pain becomes chronic and simultaneously, if we get there, how trauma and chronic pain are best friends. That's my goal. Oh, and I'm also going to throw in some neuroscience.
Oh, even better.
Oh, yeah. So we're going to start with a metaphor because I really like them.
Okay.
A skill. You were bad at it.
Yeah.
You practiced it over time.
Yeah.
You got good at it.
Do I have to be good at it, or can I just have been better at it than I was?
Yeah.
Okay.
Improvement's acceptable.
Well, then I'll say singing. because I was always bad at it. Now I'm slightly less bad at it, and I had to put a lot of work into being slightly less bad at it.
Okay.
Yeah.
That will work. Are there any physical activities that you were bad at and you practiced and got good at?
Sure. So let's say running.
Running.
Yeah.
Okay. I can use either of those.
Okay.
Okay. But I'm going to use running for our sake. Good.
Perfect.
Here's how I'm going to say this to you. The pathways in your brain are like the muscles in your body. The more you use the pathways in your brain, the bigger and stronger they get, right? That's just straight up neuroscience. It's called neurons that fire together, wire together.
Wire together.
Yes.
So I'll say my homunculus in my brain, which maps out my motor, it's all perineum. I don't know why. I hardly use my perineum.
Wait, TMI, everybody. TMI.
I'm just trying to throw you off your game.
TMI.
Because you're so
you
good at it.
You didn't do it. You didn't.
I can't.
Yeah.
All right, I'll keep trying.
Ready?
Go for it.
Good. Great.
Yeah.
Great. So if you said to me, Zoffness, I want really huge biceps, I would say,
Bruh.
You
don't need to want, all right? There's nothing to want here.
I would say, those are okay, Zubin. But if you want big biceps, go to the gym and lift weights. And over time with repetition, the more you use the muscle, the bigger and stronger they will get. It's the same with the pathways in your brain. The more you use those pathways, the bigger and stronger that pathway gets. So when you practice singing over time, at first, you're not good at it. But over time, the singing pathway in your brain gets very big and strong. Because singing is a lot of things, by the way. It's your auditory cortex. It's using your vocal cords. It's reading sheet music, if that's something you do. But I don't want to make any assumptions here.
Please don't.
And same with running, right? Running is also requires a lot of different parts of your body and brain working together. So over time, the more you sing or the more you run, the bigger the singing pathway in your brain gets, the bigger the running pathway in your brain gets. Of course, your body is changing along with your brain. Guess what happens when after many weeks and months and years, you inadvertently, accidentally practice pain? The pain pathway in your brain gets really big and strong. And when that happens, we say that your brain has become sensitive to pain. What does that mean? That took me a long time to be able to explain. So when we say a dog is sensitive to smell, what that means is a dog would come in here and sniff around. It would pick up on scents that you and I don't even detect, because small bits of sensory input to a dog's brain are very big. Same when the brain becomes sensitive to pain. Small bits of sensory input from the body are amplified. So to your brain, when you have a big and strong pain pathway, those small bits of sensory input are amplified, and to you, they seem and feel very big. Make sense?
Wow.
Yeah.
I have never thought of it that way.
It's called central sensitization.
Yes.
It's this well-known.
I've heard the term, but I've never heard it described like that.
That's right. Yeah. But everybody, and I mean everybody with chronic pain, has experienced some form of brain sensitization in some form or another. That's just how experience and time work, whether we like it or not. So central sensitization, which again is just this phenomenon by which the brain becomes sensitive to pain over time, underlies chronic pain conditions, which is why when we're treating pain, it's really important to desensitize the brain. How do you desensitize the brain? Can I give you a quick metaphor?
Yeah, please.
Great. So if you imagine being in a very dark room, like you've been in a movie theater and it's pitch black, and then someone turns on the lights and you're like, oh my eyes, I can't turn them off, because your brain over time has become accustomed to the dark, right? Your pupils.
Rods, cones, living together, mass hysteria.
Right. Your eyes have adapted to the dark. So to desensitize a sensitive brain, it's like being in a very dark room and opening up, if you imagine like blinds, opening up just a crack. So at first the light is jarring, it hurts. You're like, close that. And then if you just keep it open after 15 minutes, your eyes have adapted, your brain has adjusted, because it's not your eyes actually, it's your brain, has adjusted, and you're okay. And then you open the blinds just a little bit more light comes in. It's jarring, it hurts, 15 minutes go by, you desensitize, you can handle the light, and gradually, very slowly over time, you're in a light-filled room and you're okay. And it's the exact same with treating chronic pain. So little bits of stimulation are exactly what a sensitive brain needs. So it's a small, gradual return to physical activity, which sounds so scary, understandably. It's a gradual return to social activity. And some people, of course, can't. There are some conditions where you're...
Just can't do it. Yeah.
Right, you can't. But in general, the treatment for chronic pain is completely counterintuitive. It's the opposite of what you think. It's the opposite of what your brain is telling you to do. Your brain is telling you to stay in the dark room because it feels safe, and your brain is sensitive. And to desensitize a sensitive brain, you need to let the light in, but a little bit at a time.
I mean, and that seems to have applicability to a lot of related conditions, whether it's PTSD, anxiety.
I know.
It's real interesting. But now I could feel if I'm a chronic pain sufferer, which I am actually technically, because I have chronic neck pain for now 3-4 years.
That's chronic pain, friend.
Gotten a lot better, by the way. You know why? Because I do posture exercises and stretching and those little back rollers, and it's vastly better. And even now when I sit with you, you'll notice how every now and again I'll do this kind of thing, because I'm like, so it's adjusting lifestyle, but it wasn't, it wasn't avoidance of the pain. It was going, okay, well, what can I do to try to, and when I feel it, I kind of, it's complicated, but I've not taken a pill for it. I got a PT referral that I haven't filled out yet, but it's a thing. So the question though that I can see some chronic pain sufferers saying is, well, if practicing pain builds those circuits, then shouldn't I just be on narcotics very early on to prevent any pain practice? And why doesn't that fix it?
So I want to say up front, I am not anti-medication, and I want to be very clear about that. I think all medications have a place, and God bless medications, especially for acute pain like post-surgical pain. And there are medications that are appropriate for pain, so I do not mean to suggest that. I more just want to put the power back into the hands of people living with pain and say there are things beyond medications that we can do for pain, and I think we just need to stop focusing on that as the exclusive or primary goal when it comes to pain management, because it's focusing just on this tiny little piece, and there's like a rainbow of things that we can do, so it's more just that. But so what research has shown, medications do not desensitize a brain to pain. In fact, there's very controversial research that shows that actually over time, what opioids do specifically is they sensitize the brain to pain. And I didn't make that up. It's not my research, so don't get mad at me.
No, I've seen that research. I've cited that research.
But what they do is your brain gets sensitive over time anyway, because you're inadvertently, accidentally using over and over again this pain pathway, and you're strengthening. And when you take opioids, actually what they're doing is they're making your brain more sensitive to the sensory input from your body, not less. And so it blankets, you feel nothing when you're on opioids, right? Because they block all of your, what I'm going to call pain receptors, just to simplify an overly complex phenomenon.
Yeah, exactly.
It is very complicated, but they block all the receptors that make you feel these terrible things. So while you're on them, you feel a lot better. But over time, what's happening is your brain is actually getting more sensitive to pain. And I say that because a lot of people are never told that information up front. So yes, medication for acute pain, opioids for acute pain, great. But for long-term chronic pain, we need to be doing other things too.
Which is part of the tragedy of yanking away opioids suddenly on someone who's had chronic pain and has been on them.
It's horrifying.
Yeah, and you hear it on the forums and stuff.
Horrifying.
People are terrified.
And it's horrifying.
Yeah,
right? It's unethical.
Yeah. Because
you're not providing people with other pain management tools.
Yeah, exactly.
And now their brain is extra sensitive, and you're just like throwing them to the wolves.
Right. It's as unethical as starting down that path without exploring the other paths as well simultaneously.
Totally.
Yeah,
totally.
Yeah.
Back to your original question, because I haven't forgotten.
Oh, I have. What was my original question?
Trauma.
Oh, yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, but first I feel like we have to understand the science and the neuroscience before we can talk about this this complex overlapping thing. So
I'm going to interrupt you one more time.
Yeah, no, do it.
What I love about you, Rachel, and this is a pure compliment, is that you won't let your experience, knowledge, and understanding of things be reduced to sound bites. So you'll take something I ask and you'll say, let me take you on a journey that will explain this in a way that you will understand it better. And I Love that. So every time you do that, I get a little burst of dopamine. All right, so back to trauma.
I appreciate that. I mean, for me, I just feel like science should be in the hands of the people. Like, I love being a nerd, and I'm glad I went to school for 500 years, but pain is a ubiquitous human phenomenon, and what human being doesn't deserve to understand their pain? So, or to connect it with all these emotional experiences that we all have as humans. So that is what I want to do. I just want to like go on these journeys and just bring it back around.
I love it.
So I'm glad. That's nice feedback. So trauma. So PTSD is a formal diagnosis that's given to people who have experienced profound trauma where either their life was in danger or they witnessed someone else's life in danger. And there's a lot of things that happen when you have PTSD. It's post-traumatic stress response. And stress, in my mind, is a really key word there, because what happens after you experience a trauma is that your nervous system goes into overdrive. And by that, I mean your sympathetic nervous system is your fight or flight system. Can I say the nerdy science of that?
Please do. I want to hear about all kinds of, sympathetic, vagus nerve, parasympathetic. I mean, go deep.
Yeah, I actually want to hear how you explain this too, because I think you and I are two sides of the same coin. Yeah. So I want to hear your thoughts on it too. So sympathetic nervous system. Back in the day, humans were food. We were hunted. So when we were out on the plains with our spears and our loincloths, yours was decorated with tea kettles.
It was, and yes. It did not cover the perineum. That's why it's so hyperstimulated.
So TMI. So much TMI.
Tea kettling.
Animals were hunting us. So our brains did us this phenomenal favor where they evolved a mechanism to protect us in case of extreme danger. And that is your fight or flight system. So when a lion was approaching, you could either sit down on the ground and start thinking, what should I do now? Should I call Bobby? Should I
do some math?
Dig a hole?
Get your abacus out, right? Yeah.
Right. Instead, your body gives you a cascade, a biological cascade. So hormones, neurotransmitters get released into your bloodstream. Adrenaline starts bumping. A lot of things happen. And we've all experienced this when we go into fight or flight, when we're nervous. So sweaty palms, dry mouth, your pupils open to collect more light. Your heart starts racing. Your blood rushes away from your extremities to your core, because your core is the most important part of your body. Digestion halts. All of these things happen because the energy is required to either flight, which is run for your life, or fight, which is you take your spear and you try and get that line before it gets you. And then, of course, there's the freeze response also, which is like you play dead, fight, flight, freeze. So with PTSD, we see an abundance of sympathetic nervous activation. We also see this change in the brain where the brain tries to protect you from any future threat. So people who have experienced trauma have a symptom called hypervigilance. And hypervigilance is you're extra vigilant all of the time. By vigilant, I mean aware and hyper aware of your environment and on edge. So if you tap someone on the shoulder when they're hyper vigilant, they'll startle, they'll jump.
It's almost like stimulation sensitivity, right?
That
if
is true.
Pain sensitivity that you've been practiced.
Yep.
It's stimulates any trigger you're hypersensitive to. So these pathways all seem to converge.
They all converge. And when you're anxious, your sympathetic nervous system is on overdrive. PTSD has historically been categorized under the heading of anxiety and stress disorders. So here's the relationship, full circle. When you have experienced a trauma, your brain is trying to protect you from future traumas. So it's on high alert. One could say it is sensitive to input. Your brain has become sensitive after a trauma. Pain, as you said before, is your body's warning system, your danger detection system. So pain exists to protect you. So if you step on a nail and you keep running, that will be bad for your body. If you break your leg and you keep running and you have no pain, that will be bad for your body. If you put your hand on a burning stove and your skin melts off and you don't do something about it, that is going to be bad for you. So pain exists to protect you, ultimately. Again, we know with chronic pain that the brain has become hypersensitive over time. Same with trauma. Trauma is a hypersensitive brain trying to protect you from danger. Pain is a hypersensitive brain trying to protect you from danger. They are best friends. And if you look at the research, trauma, especially in veterans, which have been studied extensively, and chronic pain end up being best friends. So people who have had trauma early on in life, childhood trauma. And there's an abundance of studies. They're called the ACEs studies by Felitti. Yes. The ACEs studies show children with early childhood trauma are more likely to develop chronic pain and chronic illness later on in life. That is not that's not a coincidence. The brain is now sensitized. It's like they call it like a fingerprint. Like it's like a fingerprint in your brain. You're more likely to develop these things. And then same with adults with trauma. If you're an adult with trauma, you are also more likely to develop chronic pain because your brain is in this sensitized state. So chronic pain and trauma are best friends, whether we like it or not.
Man, that's awesome.
A lot.
They're best friends. They're part of a web. That's why pain, trauma, PTSD, all this are mingled in this kind of zzz, and yet we want to go doink to one little part of that and expect it to improve.
Yeah.
We can't. We have to look at it. And I think part of the problem that people with chronic pain have is sometimes they feel there's no therapeutic alliance with witnessing what they're suffering. And I think by witnessing all aspects of their suffering, it's a much more powerful therapeutic alliance too than just saying, you know what, I got the answer for you. It's back surgery.
Right.
And the idea of ACEs, these adverse childhood experiences.
Thank you.
So as an internist, I don't see the kids, right? But I see the adult kid who now has hypertension, diabetes, congestive heart failure. Yeah. Hypertension in its own thing, I think, is fascinating. We call that some physical condition. I don't think it's I think it's biopsychosocial.
Yeah.
I think that if you've had a traumatic event as a child, that sympathetic nerve undercurrent is firing in a way that is no longer productive as an adult, and it drives cardiovascular disease.
Yeah.
And it might be that it's actually further potentiated by stimuli that normally you or I would not mount a hypertension response to. So in so many ways, we say, let's reduce your hypertension to Norvasc or lisinopril, when in fact, it's all the same things you talked about, biofeedback, even cognitive behavioral therapy for hypertension, along with medication when necessary, is probably a better answer.
Right.
And then, of course, if we could prevent ACEs in the first place, we'd probably solve this problem in a couple generations.
Yeah, and thank you for adverse childhood experiences. That's what ACEs stands for. And there's an abundance of studies. It was wild to see this relationship between early trauma and physical health conditions later in life. It's like, again, why are we separating out physical and emotional? You're one human. Your brain is connected to your body 100% of the time. Like, why are we pretending that we should only treat one or the other?
And I think the best example of that, first of all, the placebo effect. Like, what the heck?
Oh, boy.
Come on. It's staring right at us. It's kind of like, when Galileo's like, you know what? Earth goes around the sun. It's like, well, yeah, it was right in front of us the whole time. We just were looking from the wrong perspective. It's the same with this kind of thing. I mean, can you kind of speak to that a little bit?
Oh, can we talk about placebo for a minute?
Yes, please.
I'm dying actually to hear what you think. And in my mind, placebo is this big missed gift. I remember when I was doing my PhD, we would look at these studies and we would say, oh, well, the placebo did, helped this many people, and this treatment helped only a few people more. So it must be a wash. And I rolled with that. It's almost like this brainwashing thing that happens in graduate school. And I was like, oh, placebo. And I would hear myself using that word as like, oh, it's just placebo. Now, having gone down that rabbit hole and being like a health and pain psychologist and thinking about like what actually helps people, placebo, what it means is when you believe a thing is going to help you, there is a change in your brain and a subsequent change in your body, and you get better. It's called self-healing.
And I'll go a step further and go, you don't even have to believe in the placebo.
Right.
There's some part of your unconscious that gets benefit. It's a therapeutic alliance with a concept, almost.
Give me the placebo for every one of my conditions all day, every day.
Yep.
It's no side effects, and it's all the benefits, and you get better. It's unbelievable.
Which is why, and this
give
is a
me a
little
placebo pill.
Dude,
all day.
They used to. You could prescribe something called Obikelp. which is placebo spelled backwards.
Oh.
And it used to be you could write a prescription for Obicalp and give it to patients, and patients will get better. But now it's like considered unethical.
No, I want it.
Yeah, I want it too.
I want it.
So
how do we?
Yeah, how do we do
Yeah.
that? Now, what's amazing is separating the placebo effect. And the placebo effect appears to have gotten stronger over time as our collective unconscious believes more strongly in the reductionist medical model. So now you could do the same like SSRI trials that back then, if you ran them again now, the placebo would be so strong the SSRI might not succeed against the placebo because we've lifted placebo up.
That makes me happy.
Doesn't it?
Yeah.
But there was a piece of that I was going to say. So placebo. Oh, so when something does work against placebo in a profound way, you can be pretty sure that it has a mechanistic success. And a good example I'd give is like the mRNA vaccines for coronavirus. It's like,
right.
Look at those trials.
Right.
That's a placebo-controlled, double-blinded, randomized trial.
Right.
Oh, there's a huge difference between the groups.
Right.
So
shit works.
The shit works.
Yeah.
Right. So that's why I think, whereas other drugs, like especially in psychiatric medications and
let's go down that rabbit hole.
Yeah, do it.
Yeah. No. Finish your thought.
No, I don't want to now because that's what I want to talk about. Yeah, I know. Well, no, but this idea that placebo is powerful means again, mind, body. They're one field. It's been staring at us, and yet we don't ever harness it or understand it or properly study it. There's some guy at Harvard who's good at studying this. I forget his name.
I know. I want to like replicate him. Why aren't we putting all of our money towards this magic? And by the way, I am a scientist and I am not a woo-woo, like, why aren't we putting all of our money toward this scientific process we see happening in every scientific study where people are getting better because you're telling them they're going to? There is a self-healing mechanism that literally means there is a self-healing mechanism inside all of us that we don't know how to tap into. That's what that means. It's so hopeful for me. It's like, it's mind-blowing. It's for mental health. It's for physical health. It's for pain. It's just, how do we dump all of our resources into researching the crap out of that?
or cut to the chase and just dump all our resources into community connections and therapeutic alliance and
social medicine.
Because when I went to my doctor just a few weeks ago, I hadn't seen a doctor in like tons of years, and I had all the usual labs and lipids. By the way, I went to a major healthcare integrated center around here that isn't Kaiser, actually. It's a different center. And when I got my bill, I was just like, my jaw dropped. Nobody tells you what things cost, like a CBC for $60, really? But anyways, that's another talk. The dude was one of my contemporaries at UCSF and sat and listened to me and elicited, like with the back pain and I have some tennis elbow, this kind of thing. Minor stuff, but it was causing a degree of suffering. Like I was avoiding activities like meditation because I couldn't sit for that long without having severe neck pain. Just the act of him saying, "Oh, yeah, I see this must be difficult for you, and we'll do a PT, referral, and we'll do this. And have you tried this? Have you tried this? Oh, okay. Well, I think it's this." Examining, laying hands. I already feel a million times better just by having that connection. And I'm a scientist. Like I'm again, the woo-woo thing doesn't come natural for me.
Yeah.
I don't think that's woo. I think that's the nature of reality.
Of course. Yeah. Humans are social animals and we need each other to survive.
Absolutely.
And the number one trigger if you think about what happened during the pandemic, people were isolated. Depression went up, anxiety went up, chronic pain went through the roof, overdoses.
Still rising,
went through the roof. So humans are social animals and we need each other to be okay. And I think that's an important point. And also to your point about anxiety and depression, something that always makes me crazy is sort of this thing that also happened with chronic pain, which is somehow we medicalized these really common human experiences. And I do believe in anxiety and depression, so I don't want to suggest that I don't. But somehow Big Pharma has convinced everybody that anxiety is a chemical imbalance and depression is a chemical imbalance. And that what that means is you have a mental illness, your brain is broken, and the only thing that can fix it is, do you want to guess? It's a pill.
It ends with a little registered trademark circle around it.
And you have to buy it from a pharmaceutical company. So what I want to say very clearly and very loudly, but I won't yell because it's just the two of us in a studio.
You can yell, I have a compressor on.
And there's a microphone in front of my face. Depression does not mean your brain is broken. Anxiety does not mean your brain is broken. Neither of those things are exclusively due to chemicals. Both anxiety and depression are this word, biopsychosocial, which means, yes, there are biological components to the human body, always. And there are psychological components. What I mean is your thoughts affect your mood and your anxiety all the time. If you start thinking, let's see, what's a particularly depressing thought? Nobody likes me. I'll never get better. The world is on fire and it's ending and there's no hope. You think that's going to affect your mood? You bet your ass it will. Thoughts affect emotion. Of course they do. And social behavior, again, we've got bio, we've got psych, we've got social. Social behavior also affects anxiety and depression. If you are in an abusive or otherwise dysfunctional relationship, you think that might affect your mood and your stress and your anxiety? Yes. If you've been abandoned by your family, you think you might feel depressed or anxious? Yes, you will. If you're cut off from your community, if you've lost your job, if, God forbid, you're a parent who's lost a child. So depression is not simply you have too little serotonin, here is a pill to raise. That is not what depression is. That's not what anxiety is. Big Pharma has sent us all for a ride. And for some reason, we now believe in medicine that we should be sometimes exclusively treating these conditions with a medication. And again, I want to say, I am not anti-medication. Medications are very helpful for some people some of the time. Some people will say their lives have been saved because of a medication, and I am totally all about it. I am all about whatever works. What I am not all about is fleecing the public into believing that depression and anxiety means that you have a chemical imbalance and there's only one way out. There are lots of ways out, and depression lives in the middle of that biopsychosocial bubble, and so does the anxiety. Can a pill help? Sure. Some people, some of the time. Is it the only answer? No. Is it a panacea? Definitely not. That's my soapbox.
Take them. Hey, man, this is amazing. No, we're 1,000% aligned on that, And my mother, the psychiatrist, feels the same way.
Wow.
But again, she'll also double down on your emphasis that there are lives that have been saved by these medicines.
Yeah.
Of course, we know this.
Yes.
Well, but that's fine. That's the prevailing cultural wisdom that is run by big financial incentives. These aren't bad human beings, by the way. I don't like the villainization of pharma. It's the villainization of the incentive that you make money by doing things to people with pills. What if we made money by actually helping people? Right. Well, then we would probably help people more.
Right.
But we don't. We thought that's how you help people in the beginning of this kind of scientific revolution of medicine. But now we're realizing, actually, there's a step beyond that, which is this more integral way of thinking. In social discourse and ideology, I call it the alt middle. It's seeing everything is true but partial as part of this web of network. Mm-hmm. It's this radical idea that you don't assume people are evil because they don't share your idea, but you do listen and you say, okay, well, Ken Wilber, again, another philosophy reference, calls it integral thinking. It's holistic. Everybody's made of holons. We're all wholes and part of bigger wholes. And each of us are those four quadrants of I, it's, it, and we. So if you don't see the whole thing, okay, and I get it. It's hard to see the whole thing, and we don't get paid to see the whole thing, and we don't get trained to see the whole thing. But if we don't do it, we get reduced to a pill or the opposite, right? We get reduced to like some new age circles that are like, man, if you just like balance your chakra, like all that hypertension would go away, bro. And it's like, yeah, yes, and there's something else. Right. And one other thing I want to say about that, there's a saying in Zen that is, thinking is the disease of the human mind. Mm. Now, what they mean by thinking is they don't mean like creative thought or planning or strategizing, none of that. They mean the self-referential discursive thought, like your pain, what you've described as your pain voice, Mrs. Beasley, the voice that's like, you're never going to get better.
From the last episode.
Yeah. And it's in your book and so on. Actually, Beasley isn't in the book, is she?
She is.
Oh, she is. Okay,
She is.
Yeah. This idea that when we identify with those thoughts, when we lose ourselves as feeling we are this, that's when things go awry. And you have tools in the book and elsewhere that say, okay, now we can actually, let's make a little space between us and our thought.
Yeah.
And truth test these thoughts.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, there's like so many things to say about all the things you just said.
I can tell. I can watch you when I say things like that, and I just see your mind is like, there's 30,000 things I want to talk about.
Yeah, well, so I want to go back to being problem solvers, because I think you and I are both those things. And it's one thing to talk about how, it's important to not just tell everyone that their brains are broken and they need a pill to fix it, first of all, but then it's also important to offer some alternative solutions. So research shows that there are treatments for anxiety and depression that are equally as helpful as medications, or that can be used in conjunction with medications, like cognitive behavioral therapy, like mindfulness-based stress reduction, which I know sounds like voodoo, but I have used it myself. It is very, very helpful.
It works.
Like biofeedback, which again is this really cool science where you learn to connect the thoughts in your head with the sensations in your body. There's a ton of stuff out there. Lifestyle medicine, so changing what you eat and how much you exercise and changing sleep hygiene. So there's a million things we can do for anxiety and depression, either in addition to or besides medication. And it's just so important to put tools in the hands of the people who need them. That's like my whole MO. So yes, I want to change the story. I think there's a lot of story around, it's just a chemical problem, you're mentally ill. I want to change that story because I really firmly, passionately believe that humans experience anxiety and depression normally and naturally over the course of our lives. I want to destigmatize that. I don't think it's a sign of mental illness. Of course, yes, extreme depression, extreme anxiety requires extreme intervention, but humans, we are emotional creatures. We all, just because you experienced anxiety during the pandemic, does that mean you have a mental illness? I vote no. I would call that an external or situational trigger that triggered most of us to have higher than normal anxiety. So anxiety is not always a sign of mental illness. Sometimes you're depressed during a pandemic because you're cut off from your loved ones and you can't go to work and you can't go to your favorite restaurant. So all these things contribute. All of these things are complex and they're a biopsychosocial picture. And if any of us want to help our patients, or if any of us want to get well, we need to look at all the parts.
I'm about to tea kettle right now, woman.
Let me hear it.
Fuck this pandemic.
Yeah, I know.
It's a collective kind of suffering that has descended on all of us, and it affects us as individuals. And like you said, it doesn't mean we're mentally ill.
Right.
It means we're humans. We're social creatures. We trigger off the news. We trigger off others. We trigger off getting shamed at a supermarket for either not wearing a mask or wearing a mask.
Right.
For getting vaccinated or not getting vaccinated. And it just becomes this collective thing that we want to reduce to, and then what do we see? Overdoses. Like up 30% or something during the pandemic.
Yep.
Something ridiculous.
Yeah.
And they were already bad before. Our life expectancy was already going down before. And then you look at, like, say, Dan Buettner's blue zones where people live to be 100 and all this stuff, and like places like, parts of southern Greece, I think, southern Italy. And you go, wait, what are they doing different? They're not on a bunch of SSRIs. They're not taking Norvasc or Lipitor or lisinopril usually. They have tight communities where people are active until late in life, where they're supported by each other, where they're social, where they eat reasonably and reasonably fresh food, where they don't chase a lot of material acquisition, where their stress levels are modulated by stuff in the community, and where if someone's feeling
in the ocean,
and they're swimming in the ocean, they're active, they're getting reasonable amounts of natural sunlight. Yeah. But what have we created here? The perfect utopia to make us sick, obese, and depressed. And then we want someone like you to solve it with a pill. And when you say, oh, it's actually much more beautifully complex than that, and also within your control, I'm sure people will be like, I'm going to go to the other person who's just going to give me the pill.
And that's okay. And that's okay. Life is complicated, and all these health conditions are complicated, and I think it's really human to want a quick fix. I know that I have always wanted that too. Like I was a kid with chronic stomach aches, and I wanted a quick fix, and it turned out that I had social anxiety, and it was like I couldn't stand up in front of let alone give an interview. I couldn't stand up in front of a class without passing out and getting a stomach ache and getting nauseous and vomity. So everyone wants a quick fix. I think that's called being human. And I don't judge. I try not to judge that, but I do want to make sure to say that we're all going to get healthier if we're targeting all the things instead of just one of the things.
Man, I really feel for you with the stomach ache thing. No, because I had that too as a kid.
Really?
High anxiety kid. Probably had like formal irritable bowel syndrome when I was late teens, early 20s, like in college.
Will you tell people what that means?
Well, I don't really know, but I'll say what it meant for me is like anytime I didn't even know I was stressed. But suddenly you're just like cramping pain, nausea, have to run to the bathroom and you feel like something is wrong physically.
Of course.
Like, it's not feel. You're convinced that this is a physical problem that needs something put up your butt to figure out what it is. I never had that, but if I had access to it, I've been like, sure, figure it out because I have cancer. There's something going on.
Of course.
Right?
Yeah.
And in fact, the fact that it got better when my anxiety improved just naturally, and it's pretty much gone now, is a testament to a piece of that. And the other testament to this whole mind-body thing is that the sense that you said it earlier, you get butterflies in your stomach. It's a physical sensation of an emotional state. They call them feelings because you feel when they're in the body.
Right. It's physical and emotional.
So tell me, how do you think about these kind of stomach ailments? Because I'm sure you take care of kids and stuff who suffer with this.
Yeah. The speech I give parents is the number one sign of stress and anxiety in kids that I see is stomach aches and headaches. Now, I had a neurologist get very angry with me. She said, "You're stigmatizing my patients."
Oh.
And I said, I don't feel any stigma around explaining to parents that physical and emotional are connected. That's what science says, and I am just a conduit. I'm just report. But from her perspective, when you say that to a family, you're suggesting the child is mentally ill.
Oh
just to be
gosh.
clear, that is not at all
dude.
what I'm suggesting.
Dude, and how painful is it when you watch as an objective observer and you see the child suffering with headaches and stomach aches, and you go, look at the home situation. Look at the level of stress.
Yeah.
It's staring you at the face, and sometimes I'm scared to tell people, there's a lot going on here, and the $1 million scans and stuff are not going to answer your question.
That's right. Well, and the kid has also said to me that they're anxious. And they're experiencing social anxiety, and they have a number of phobias. And,
oh my gosh.
Yeah. So the stomach thing is particularly interesting to me on a personal level, but also because stomach aches and abdominal pain are so common. All of us have experienced the butterflies in your stomach or the nausea before a big, performance or something at work. You'll get stomach aches or headaches. And again, that's because emotions don't just live in your head. They also come out in your body. That's just how the body is built. But specifically with stomach aches, there is something called the enteric nervous system. I had never heard of this before when I was a kid with stomach aches. I wish any doctor had told me about it. Your enteric nervous system is this fascinating combination of neurotransmitters and nerves and tissue in your gut. And okay, pop quiz. Guess which part of your body, you've heard of serotonin, of course. Maybe. I just don't know if the audience has. So serotonin is a brain chemical, a neurotransmitter that regulates a lot of things. It does a lot of things like appetite and sleep, but it's most popularized for regulating mood. So if you've heard of an SSRI, that's a very popular antidepressant and even anti-anxiety medication, and it regulates this chemical, this brain chemical called serotonin. Serotonin is thought to be this like big regulator of emotion and mood, and people think of it as like this happy medication. So when you take an SSRI, it makes you happy because it raises serotonin. That's not exactly how it works, but that is the popular marketing of it. Guess which part of your body has the most serotonin?
It's your enteric nervous system.
It's your gut.
Your gut.
It's your gut.
It's a transmitter.
It's not your
there.
brain.
Yeah.
It's not your brain.
It's actually
80 to 90%, 80 to 90% of the body's serotonin lives in your gut. Your gut is your body's emotion center, in addition, of course, to your brain. So it's why you have a gut instinct. You feel something in your gut. Why? Why? Oh, well, it's your emotion center. 80 to 90% of your serotonin is in your gut. So there's a reason why you get stomach aches when you're nervous, and there's a reason why you were getting cramping. So I just want to say, if anyone is living with stomach aches or experiences vomiting or diarrhea or constipation or any of those normal and natural things that happen when we're in a state of stress, and by the way, most of us are in a state of stress most of the time due to family conflict or pandemics or work stress or whatever. So there's a lot of articles on the enteric nervous system. I actually have a really nerdy website, which is just my last name. It's Zoffness.com. And there's a ton of resources on the enteric nervous system because I am fascinated by it. There's scientific articles. Scientific American has articles. But also to say, part 2, the science of the stomach ache. We talked before about fight or flight, which is your sympathetic nervous system, which gets activated when you are anxious or stressed. It's trying to save your life. One of the things that happens when fight or flight occurs is that digestion halts. So before you were rolling along, normally digesting your food, and then suddenly digestion halts. So have you ever seen a bird get scared and fly away?
It usually sharts itself.
That's correct. We call that evacuation because when you fight or flight, you want to be as light as possible so you can fly off or run off. Humans do the same thing. When we are in a state of stress, our body often tries to evacuate. So you vomit or you have diarrhea or whatever. And so you have the urge to go to the bathroom. So it's, again, a good sign from your body that you're experiencing stress. For some of us, we know that we're stressed and then we notice our body. For others of us, it's the opposite. Like you said, when you're a kid, you just feel your body freaking out. We don't get a lot of emotion education as a child. So you feel your body freaking out and you're like, why is this happening to me? I don't know what's going on. I think I have a disease. and it's your body telling you that it's in a state of stress or that you're anxious.
Oh, man. I mean, if we could just educate kids on this and their emotions. You said we don't get a lot of education in emotions. I'm going to respectfully disagree, but not in the way you think. I think we do get plenty of education on emotions, on how to repress them, how to ignore them, how to hide them, how to push them down further into the body. And you know, my friend Angelo DeLullo, who is a big meditator, has a saying. He says, emotions really want to be experienced for what they are. And when you start to repress them, it's kind of like goes in the spectrum of your tea kettling idea. If you don't let things inhabit you and pass through you, you continue to obfuscate them with various things. They're going to misbehave in ways that come out as in passive ways. Yeah. And some of those are physical. The stomach ache. The other thing that you said that I thought was very important is this fight or flight thing. And I have talked about this fear of speaking or fear of being on a podcast or fear of whatever it is. Well, it turns out like we evolved in a way, our persuasive skills evolved to convince others in the tribe that whatever our emotional state is valid, or whatever our gut instinct is valid. And when we're up there trying to convince others, we are in physical peril. Meaning, if we fail to persuade the tribe or fail to influence them, we get worse breeding rights, worse eating, worse hunting, etc. We could be excommunicated from the tribe. So in a way, your life's in danger when you publicly speak, historically. So now we translate that into, I've got to give a talk for my company or whatever. I got the slides and I'm shitting myself beforehand, or shaking, or sweating, or whatever are the physical manifestations. That's our fight or flight.
Exactly.
We're trying to decide, am I going to die up there? Literally. That's why comedians say, oh man, I died up there. It's literal historically. So once you start to realize that, there are ways that you can listen to your body and actually short circuit some of those natural reflexes.
Agree.
And some of that's just practice.
Oh yeah, some of it's exposure.
Exposure.
It's doing the thing you're scared of. That's like literally the reason I'm here. By the way, I almost bailed. I was really nervous, and I was like, I'm just going to cancel.
You know what? I could feel that through the text thread.
Yeah.
Because it's and you know what? And I gave you an out too.
I know.
I was like,
I love you.
You can go, and you braved up and said, you know what? It'll just. I'll feel the same way.
No, I told you I was nervous. So the only treatment, for people who have performance anxiety, and it can be performance for like speaking, it can be performance for a sport like soccer, or, giving a talk at work, the only way out is through. The only way out is through. And I have to remind myself of that all the time too, because I have these things I really want to talk about, and I'm passionate about changing the way we treat pain and the way we talk about mental illness. And the only way to do that is to get over yourself. And anxiety is real. And the treatment for anxiety, by the way, is exposure therapy. What I'm doing now is an extreme version of that, but I've worked my way up to it. So for me at first, it was like giving talks to small groups of 5 and then doing bigger groups and then speaking at conferences, which took like a lot of, work and nervousness and occasionally vomiting. But then you get to a point where you're like, no, this thing I want to do is so important that I'm willing to do the work to make it happen. So I am always committed to not bailing when I feel nervous, but the urge is always there, even still after years and years of working on this. It's so interesting.
Now, and what's really interesting too is that you don't, so it points out how our internal states are our internal states and often are inscrutable to those outside. So I'm betting the audience would never, ever guess that you have an iota of nervousness talking about any of this, because you come off as natural, engaged, sincere, all of which are true.
Yeah.
But then you'll openly say, hey, this is how I felt before this, or this is what happened before this, which means you've gotten very good at expressing your inner states externally.
Yeah.
But otherwise, I would never have known.
Oh, interesting.
I never would have guessed. Last time you told me.
You picked it up on the text thread.
What's that?
You picked it up on the text thread.
Well, and the only reason I did is the last time that you came, you had mentioned afterwards, you said, man, it was stressful for me. And I was like, I would never have guessed. I'm not perceptive enough to pick that up. Yeah. But then reframing it, I go, well, there were little subtle signs of it, but boy, I never would have caught it.
Yeah.
So again, I think in some way it's liberating as an exposure to let that come out to others.
Sure.
Right?
Well, I think people have experiences that they realize in retrospect could be useful for other people. Yeah. And I think a lot of us do this thing where, and anxiety tells us to, where we avoid the things that trigger anxiety. Right. That's actually part of fight or flight. Flight is avoidance, to be perfectly clear.
Yeah.
So when you feel that anxiety response, your brain is telling you that you should avoid the trigger. And that's useful if it's a lion that wants to eat you, but it is not useful if it's things that can take you forward in your life or help other people or further a message, right? So we avoid. So if I forever, for the rest of my life, since like early childhood, avoided public speaking, I would never be able to get the word out. I would never be able to help people or treat people. I would never be able to write a book and pitch it to a publisher. You know what I mean? All these things, like, you get in your own way at some point. So the treatment, again, the only way out is through. But again, back to the metaphor with like opening the blinds a little light at a time. Exposure therapy for anxiety is the same, similar to treating a chronic pain condition where you do little bits of the thing that scare you. Yeah. You approach teeny bits at a time rather than avoid. So that is the treatment for anxiety, by the way.
Yeah, which is again, I understand this idea with like trigger warnings and safe spaces and all that. I get the concept because it's too much stimulus.
That's right. You don't want to flood. Flooding is too much.
But I think it's easy to take that the wrong way and go, well, then I don't want to, you must protect me from any stimulus. Right. No, the idea is you slowly but surely in a safe space, little bits, exposure. And maybe for PTSD, maybe for anxiety, definitely for these kind of a spectrum of what they call disorders, which are really, again, human responses.
Well, and the other thing that you mentioned is like part of the reason for nervousness, and I think this is true for many women. I was reading that even for like famous political figures who are in the limelight regularly, there's something called imposter syndrome. Which I think a lot of doctors suffer from, and I've read that it's women in particular, and it doesn't matter like it doesn't matter if you have like a degree from Brown and Columbia and UCSD and you've like done 12 postdocs. It doesn't matter. Like you can still feel like you're a phony for what message. Again, it's that voice in your head, that like BS Mrs. Beasley who tells you like you don't know what you're talking about and you're an imposter. So imposter syndrome is real.
Oh yeah.
And I think the more you're in a position of being able to help people in a public way, the more you feel it or experience it. But I think people experience it at work, and as a parent, people experience like, who am I, parenting these children or knowing what I'm doing. So that's, for me, that's part of my nervousness too.
It's really fascinating that you bring up imposter syndrome and its association with, and I wonder if it's associated with more with women statistically, because I know that I suffer from it quite a bit.
Interesting.
Oh, quite a bit. I've talked about it actually. And in fact, I talk about the Dunning-Kruger kind of curve. So in other words, you know nothing, And then all of a sudden you learn a little bit about it. You overestimate what you know. So you think, oh, I studied a little bit about vaccines, now I'm an immunologist. And so you overproject confidence. But then the more you learn about something, you enter the valley of the imposter, where you realize what there is to know is vast. And what you know is actually a small proportion of that. And so you now start to know what you don't know.
Yeah, right.
And feel like an imposter. Now, the question is, I think that is such an impediment to good people, great people doing good in the world. So, for example, my wife, I keep trying to tell her, there are so many people that want to see you talk. She's a chest radiologist, academic, wins teaching awards every year at Stanford. Incredible teacher. Everyone wants to know about the COVID findings on chest radiology, CTs, MRIs, etc. And she's like, yeah, I could do that. But, I don't want to make a mistake or like say something incorrect or, plus there's probably somebody who's better who'd do it for you. I'm like, you're my wife. There's nobody better to do it. I have the capacity to, I'm not comfortable with that. Whereas I'm like, bro, fake it till you make it.
That's right.
Just push through. And she's not even faking it, right?
Yeah, she's the real deal.
So I wonder if there is a little
gender
difference there, that guys are just kind of a little bit conditioned to, or maybe it's a testosterone thing or some hormonal thing where we're just like, bro, oh yeah, I can lift that. No problem.
It might be.
It's on your neck.
I mean, it could be a combination of things, but I think you're right that it's like sort of women are socialized in our culture to see men in positions of power and authority. And I think if you're a little girl and you grow up seeing mostly men who are speaking the things and in positions of authority, you're like, oh, well, maybe I'm not supposed to be the person who knows the things, and maybe I'm not supposed to be the person who's speaking the things. I think that happens. I can say for women and girls, that's surely a piece of it.
Related to that, I wonder, I've heard this, and I'm curious your thoughts, the sort of pattern of speech with uptalk, where you end everything with that.
Vocal fry.
Vocal fry, uptalk. I've heard it understood in some ways that it's when it happens in women, because men do it too.
Men do it too.
And that's something that, again, there's a double standard.
Totally.
When men do it, it's like, well, I'm manly. When women do it, it's like, well,
that's annoying.
That's annoying.
Yeah.
And there was some thought that unconsciously or consciously it's done by women as a kind of like, to kind of disarm men who are afraid of women who actually know what the hell they're talking about.
Like almost solicitous.
Exactly.
Or like apologizing.
Exactly right. Whereas it's like, why would you ever apologize for being awesome? But yet our society's conditioned us from young. You said when you were young.
It's pretty wild.
It's pretty wild.
I mean, I think role models matter. So I think that makes it even more important to me to like be out there. Yeah. Yeah. Women should be saying the things. Yeah.
That's a bumper sticker.
Women should be
saying the things. What things? Doesn't matter. They need to say the things.
Just say the things.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Sometimes I find I get in patterns of having a lot of men on the show, and we, shout at each other and this and that, and then I'll get women on the show, and it's like this kind of, there's a sense of, I don't know how to describe this. See, we try to deny differences between men and women too. I think to our detriment. Like we should celebrate the respective strengths, right? It's like
you have a chromosome I don't have.
And every day I wish I didn't have it because it causes me grief sometimes.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have a chromosome you don't have.
Damn you.
Two. I have two.
You have two X's?
I know, isn't that amazing?
Dude, I know some people with three. Kleinfelter.
Me too.
I'm like so jealous.
I wouldn't.
Like one more?
It's challenging. Yeah.
It is challenging. Yeah.
There's a lot of.
Yeah, extra chromosomes at any time are generally challenging.
Yes.
But also can be beautiful. But yeah, generally challenging.
Both are
diversity, right? Neurodiversity.
Yeah.
But the open sense of emotional connection with women, I find, triggers a part of me that is that feminine piece to open. And I think it's easy to repress that. In fact, it's quite easy. And that's something that's often worth exploring, I think, in our own relationships. The connection with, like, you actually have, and again, I'm going to say this as just purely observational, you have a masculine component to your communication style that actually makes it very direct and very assertive. So you'll say, okay, yeah, but let me ask you this, or let me bring it back to this. And that's very powerful too.
I'll tell you why that's not masculine.
I
am a New Yorker.
There it is.
I am a New Yorker.
There it is.
Direct, assertive communication is how I was raised. I was steeped in it. It was like bathwater.
Yeah.
But it's interesting that I do think you hit on something important, which is like that is the perception of masculine versus feminine communication. But I think
energies.
I think New York women, and I hate overgeneralizing, but I think women who grow up in New York are used to this communication style. And I have to say, moving to California was a shock to the system. People didn't know what to, like, I'm sarcastic, I'm direct, I'm assertive, and some people interpret that in a way that I don't intend, but I also embody that that's how I am and that's how I talk. And I find myself wishing that people would talk to me that way too. I appreciate it. I like authenticity. I like directness. It like helps me make sense of the world. But
yeah, from a sense-making standpoint,
yes.
It's crucial.
Yeah.
Authenticity.
Yeah.
And
you're a Jersey.
I'm a Jersey. That's why I think we get along so well. It's kind of like, oh, finally someone's speaking my language.
That's right.
You're right. California is a different vibe.
It's a different animal.
It's a different animal. And, you know, if you're born here, raised here, that's how you are, then you're authentically that.
Yeah.
So you celebrate it too, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
It just can be that east-west divide can really manifest if you're not perceptive about it in ways that generate misunderstanding.
Yeah,
it's kind of like, oh. And then, of course, again, with the gender assumptions, it's like, oh, assertive women are bitches.
Oh, yeah.
And feminine men that are more emotionally connected are pussies.
Yeah.
And,
I hate that.
Yeah, right.
I hate that. And I do wish we had more emotion education, like starting at a young age, to talk to kids about how emotions manifest physically, the connection between the stomach and the headache and the body pain and the trauma and the emotions, and then also what to do with your emotions. Like, let's talk about tea kettling in kindergarten. Like, let's help people manage their emotions early on so they don't get all bottled up and become these other monsters, you know?
It's really powerful when you allow yourself to feel an unfiltered emotion without a lot of conceptual overlay. So in other words, and that's a practice.
Say what you mean.
So it's a meditative practice where you say, oh, you know, I'm angry about something, or let's make it even more complicated to make it simple. So let's say you say something that triggers some response in me, and I happen to be that day perceptive enough to recognize I'm having a response, and it's an annoyance response. Like I'm annoyed. Okay. Why am I annoyed? So you leave, and then I feel into what's going on. Okay, annoyed. What's going on? Where does I feel that in my body? It's here. What happens when I strip away annoyance and these labels? Oh, it feels like this energy pattern. And oh, you know what it feels like? It actually feels like shame. Like it's a different emotion than I thought it was. I was putting all this complexity on. It was really just shame. Why would that be? Well, she said this, which made me feel unworthy about this, and then I felt ashamed. Oh, well, let me just feel that. Like
that's so high. Dr. Z,
yeah.
That's really high level shit you're talking about right now. It's awesome.
I read it on the toilet in a book. my friend
but
Angela.
That's high level. No, that is high level. It's like recognizing that you're having an emotional experience and then looking inside your body to see where that emotional experience is occurring, and then like looking underneath that physical somatic experience and trying to figure out, well, what's underneath that? That takes a lot of work. That's rad. I'm glad you're doing that. Let's have everybody do that.
So we can train that.
Great.
That's trainable.
Let's have a class. You want to do it?
I would love to do that.
Let's do it.
Even just like, let's name a bunch of different obscure emotions and learn to recognize and drill deeper and drill deeper.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the intellectual side.
It would help with physical health. It would help with pain.
Oh my gosh. If we could get rid of emotional repression, or at least modulate it, I think we'd see a 50% reduction in disease burden in the United States.
There is a guy I know in Berkeley who is researching that.
Really?
Yes. The role of emotional suppression and physical pain. He's also researching racism and pain, because it turns out that when you experience stressors like racism, your pain feels worse, because remember the pain dial?
Oh, yeah.
It's amplified by all the things.
By unworthiness and
all the things.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Fascinating.
Really fascinating. And then, so this is something, again, I've mused about before, but I don't know. Again, you'd have to really study it. But the fact that African Americans suffer more hypertension, diabetes, heart failure, et cetera, at younger ages, strokes, et cetera. Why would that be? You live your entire life with this undercurrent of stuff that generates a sympathic undercurrent of response.
And not even an undercurrent.
Right.
Like I'm
face. Being conservative. Right. Yeah, exactly.
Like in your face, stress, racism.
Pulled over by a cop, whatever it is. Yeah.
All day long.
All day long.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
It's a massive, humongous stressor.
Right.
Right.
Right. Yeah. You need to stop microaggressing against me with words like humongous, okay?
I'm sorry.
I'm a short 5'5" man. And that's a microaggression. And now my blood pressure went from 120 to 121. We could measure it.
Do you want to?
If we'll put an art line in and just measure it in real time.
That's what happened when I first went to biofeedback. I've been mentioning biofeedback as this treatment for chronic pain. Yeah. It's also a really helpful treatment for anxiety. So biofeedback, someone said to me, "Oh, you treat chronic pain. You should be sending your patients to biofeedback." And I said, I don't send my patients to any treatment that I don't understand. So I went to a biofeedback provider. His name happens to be Dr. Pepper.
Oh, that's
which is delightful.
Delightful already.
He's a professor at the University of San Francisco. He is brilliant, and I adore him.
I think I know Dr. Pepper.
Seriously?
I know of Dr. Pepper.
Eric Pepper?
Because
he's written all the books.
Yeah, because when I was a student there was, hey, have you talked to Dr. Pepper?
Stop.
Right. No joke.
So I went to Dr. Pepper.
Amazing.
And I sat in his biofeedback chair, and he said, I am going to teach you to warm your hands to 90 degrees. I am a chronically cold-handed person. And I was like, I do not believe in voodoo. I am a scientist. And he said, okay, doubter, close your eyes, lay back in this chair. And he connected me using this machine to a variety of sensors on my fingers and on my chest and my arms, my shoulders. And what it was measuring a bunch of different things. It was measuring skin temperature and galvanic skin response and muscle tension and heart rate and a couple of other things. So I was looking at this machine and it's reading these biological processes and it's giving me feedback about these biological processes. So I laid back in the chair, I'm connected to the machine. He's doing a bunch of things with me. He starts with relaxation training. So I'm relaxing my body, I'm relaxing my muscles, I'm using diaphragmatic breathing. He's using guided imagery, and the guided imagery includes, and I know this sounds wonky, it did to me, the guided imagery included, remember his goal is to help me warm my hands to 90 degrees. The imagery includes imagining hot air flowing from my shoulders down into my fingertips, and then hot soup on the inside of my arms. I know, I was like, what is this? Weird.
Yeah.
And then
this sounds like tea kettling to me.
Right? And then imagining the feeling of your hands over a hot campfire. You can actually, if you search your brain, you can find that feeling.
Yeah.
We can talk about the neuroscience of that too.
Oh my.
Right. And I'm doing all these relaxation things simultaneously. And then we're using something called autogenic training, which is where you say words to yourself. It's like self-suggestions. My arms and my hands are heavy and warm. My arms and hands are heavy and warm. And by the way, I've been doing this for so long that as soon as I start talking about it,
gets warm.
My hands get sweaty and red and hot.
Wow.
Yes, but what happened was over 2 sessions, my hands very quickly started going up to 90 degrees. And you can't deny it's happening because you're looking at the machine. It's giving you feedback about your biology. And I remember thinking, what else can I do with my mind? I can heat my hands. What other things can I do with my mind?
Anything.
And that's what we want for people living with chronic pain in particular.
That's such an awesome story. Oh my gosh.
Biofeedback.
And you think about monks that are able to light themselves on fire and it's some crazy stuff that's done.
It sounds like pseudoscience.
It sounds like pseudoscience, but I'm telling you it's not. And it's absolutely real, and that story is absolutely beautiful because that power of suggestion, we do it all day. You can visualize a strawberry in front of you and see a strawberry. You can taste a strawberry if you remember. We are these very complex dynamic fields of intelligence that can do these things.
That's right.
But we even just what I just said, someone's gonna be like, oh, that sounds like, woo, woo. But it works. Right. So that's all I care about. Yeah. Does it work?
That's why I recommend biofeedback to people now. That's brilliant. You don't have to believe my story, but you can go if you want and learn how to warm your hands. And when I teach it to my patients, they say, especially the kids, they say, I can make fireballs with my hands. What else can I do with my mind? And I'm like, that's right. Now let's heal your leg.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Totally.
Biofeedback. I've never tried it directly. Now I really want to go see Pepper.
Try it for your neck.
Maybe we'll do a show. Yeah, for the neck.
Yeah, you can.
By the way, my neck feels great right now.
Oh, I'm so glad.
What is it?
It's magic.
It is magic.
It's voodoo.
It might also be
maybe you're distracted.
I got a crazy roller ball with spikes on it, and I get petechiae on my back from using this thing, like little not blisters, little under the skin blood things.
Oh wow!
Because it's that intense.
Yoy.
But boy, it feels great.
Good.
And then the things go away.
Yeah, by the way, I am all about PT for chronic. PT is like phenomenal. Like the physical therapists that I work with sometimes work magic.
Yeah, because again, they're working the somatic angle of it. Yeah.
I recently was seeing a teenager with complex regional pain syndrome. He had been misdiagnosed. He had been in bed for about 2 years. He couldn't really walk. Complex regional pain syndrome is this chronic pain syndrome characterized by a bunch of things. It's changes in skin temperature. The skin can turn really hot or cold, and the leg can turn red or purple. It can swell.
Physical manifestations.
Correct.
Yes.
And it's like this chronic pain condition, so pain lasts for many months. He was getting IVIG infusions. He had a number of other underlying medical conditions as well. He had never seen a psychologist because why would you send someone with pain to a psychologist? There's so much stigma around that. Nobody even thinks of that. But we correctly diagnosed him with CRPS. He started doing CBT. I sent him to a PT in Sonora because she is amazing. Her name's Caitlin Fritz. She's an absolute magician. And within a month, we were seeing dramatic changes in his skin, like the skin color was going back to normal. Motor functioning was returning. Pain level was reducing. And like within 2 or 3 months, he was back to life. And he's like now working as a lifeguard at a swimming pool. I mean,
wow.
Like what I'm trying to say is it's remarkable. These chronic pain conditions are real. They're not made up. They're not emotional. And treatment with PT and CBT can be remarkably effective.
Remarkable. And one thing I'd want to say is some people who've tried this and say it doesn't work for me, you may want to try another provider.
Not? Yeah, that's right. Yeah. That's right. Not all providers. I mean, that's a major issue that you brought up before. A lot of physicians are not trained in pain. A lot of psychologists, most of us, are not trained in pain.
Right.
A lot of PTs and OTs, believe it or not, are not trained in pain. Like you're trained that pain is a biomedical problem, and science and research says that it's not. So what I would say is if you've been seeing providers who are seeing it in this like sort of like what you feel is maybe a narrow perspective, go and see if you can find PT, OT, psychologist or physician who sees it in a more holistic or broader capacity.
Yeah. I think that's great advice. Yeah. So I think we did a bunch of things today.
We did a lot.
Man.
We covered a lot.
We did.
Yeah.
You're awesome.
You're awesome.
We
could cover a lot more, I feel.
Well, that means just we'll have to do another show.
Great.
Yeah. If you're willing to do it.
I'm going to have to get over my performance anxiety and the urge to cancel, but sure.
Yeah. I mean, I guess like positive feedback never helps with that because the last time your episode got so much positive feedback.
Yeah, I was really glad to hear that it was helpful for people.
Yeah, they really, really got a lot. And speaking of which, I'm going to pitch your book one more time here. The Pain Management Workbook, we'll put a link up there. And this thing is great because it really does kind of summarize a lot of the stuff with action items.
Yeah.
And it's a workbook, so you work with it. You actually do stuff, which is awesome.
And also, I also wanted to make sure there was something that you could put in like if you're working with somebody who doesn't know about pain, that's a solvable problem.
Yeah.
Like if you like your therapist but they don't know about pain, or you like your doctor and they don't, just hand them the workbook and you can do it with them.
Like a Hare Krishna, just like at an airport, just hand them this.
Exactly.
Go read this.
Exactly like a Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. My mind doesn't work right. I just saw Airplane too, the original movie again, and the Hare Krishna scenes are hilarious.
So it's just on your mind.
It's on my mind.
Yeah, got it.
By the way, every time you talked about these kind of like Dr. Pepper and these guys doing this crazy research with electrodes, I just kept flashing in my mind to Ghostbusters, where Dr. Peter Venkman is doing those like ESP experiments on the guy.
What's his name?
Yeah, Rick Moranis.
Yeah.
And he's like, ow, he gets electroshock. And then the dean of like the whole institution kicks him out of his lab. And he's like, Dr. Venkman, your research methods are the worst kind of pseudoscience. You, sir, are a poor scientist.
Oh, I remember that scene so well.
And you know what's funny? That set me down the path to exquisite amounts of reductionism in science. I was like, well, anything that isn't in the Western biomedical model is pseudoscience. And I'm like, he was talking about ESP. Okay, that's a real thing. Or I have no idea if ESP is real, but biofeedback is.
Biofeedback is real.
So we need to be less about, you, sir, are a poor scientist, except when you are a poor scientist. And you know who I'm looking at, everyone on the COVID non-vax side. I had to get that in.
Oh, no, please get that in.
Yeah.
I support you.
Two words.
I just can't.
Delta.
That's one word.
Shit. God. Okay, don't listen to me. Guys, this was so much fun, Rachel.
Thank you. Fun.
Thank you. Share the show, all that other stuff. Become a supporter and join our tribe, and we do lives and stuff. And there was something else. Please subscribe to the channel if you're on YouTube, because that really just helps us get our word out. Just click the subscription button. It's free. And the little notification bell so that you get notified when we do stuff, because we're going to keep talking about crazy stuff like this because it's important. Rachel, Hare Krishna.
Thank you for having me.
Namaste.
So much fun.
Écoutez et répétez.
All those languages.
And we out. Peace. Hey guys, ZDogg. I got Jay Bhattacharya here, Dr. Jay Bhattacharya. He is a professor of medicine at Stanford, a health policy guy, health economist, and he's been on the show before. You may know him from such hits as a lot of stuff during COVID. Welcome back, Jay. Why am I spending all this time introducing you? People know who you are.
It's nice to see you back.
Yep. Dude, it's been, months since we had you on the show.
It feels like it's been too long.
Yeah, it's like a whole pandemic between us, man. Now, Jay, the reason we wanted to reconnect is there's so much stuff happening in the pandemic news. And notice I distinguish between the news and the public messaging and what's actually maybe happening in the world, what's happening in scientific discourse. You've been very vocal in the side of the science that questions, that says, you know what, is closing down the economy the right answer to this? Is, putting masks on young children the right answer to this? Are vaccine passports a good idea? Is a broad approach to this a good idea versus a targeted approach? And you were one of the co-authors of the Great Barrington Declaration, which just saying that aloud is going to get me demonetized and canceled.
Oh dear, I'm very sorry.
Yeah, thank you. You've cost me tens of dollars. So I think we can start by saying, first of all, you've been busy, but what is the main concern you have right now, sort of in this whole?
I mean, I think the central problem right now, I think, is the fear that people still feel about COVID, even after the vaccination effort has been, actually in many ways in the U.S., quite successful. I think that we are so used to this fear that we've lived under for a year that we don't know how to get out of it. So you can see this when people that are vaccinated, they still are wearing them. My mom, okay, she's 80. She got the vaccine. She got the second vaccine. It's been a month and some since she got the vaccines. And she tells me she can't, she's so used to wearing the mask that she wears it inside when there's no one there because she's just used to it. And there's still this fear. How do we decondition that?
Well, and then the question would be, and this is common. We're seeing this sort of pall of conditioned fear, and it's taken about a year of conditioning. So now, walking outside with a mask is terrifying to a lot of people, even after vaccination. Now, you and I are both vaccinated. Mm-hmm. We shook hands. We don't wear masks. We're about 3 feet apart from each other, and in the early days of the pandemic, that would have gotten us both hung. But now I can say with confidence, because I've looked at the data, our chances of giving each other COVID are pretty much zero. Yeah. So how do we decondition it? And in the setting of continued uncertainty. So I think the part of the problem is, let's forget about the press and how they portray it and the public health apparatus, but just the general uncertainty. So if Michigan's cases are surging in light of a lot of vaccination going on there, how do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the key thing is, we look at cases, we say, oh my gosh, deaths are coming. But I think if the vaccination campaign has been successful, you'll have a decoupling of the deaths and the cases. Mm. We should no longer look at, in places that have been vaccinated, where the older population is vaccinated appropriately, we should no longer look at cases as a marker of doom to come. Mm. Right? Because the vaccine is incredibly effective. There's just good news about we can talk about the Johnson & Johnson bit in a bit, but on the whole, the vaccine it's an incredible achievement, and in many ways has defanged the epidemic. It's taken away the specter of death and hospitalization that comes with the disease for the older population, to the extent that the older population is vaccinated. And so the worry that we have, overrunning hospital systems, large numbers of people dying from getting COVID, we should stop thinking that way when we see cases. The key question is still, just like it was before, actually, in some sense, who's getting these cases? And if it's the older population, we should be very concerned. If it's younger population, I mean, it's COVID. It's not good, but it's not quite the same thing.
Yeah. So why do we keep hearing then about like these new variants affecting young people more, or concerns about mortality in the new case surges in a way that it is younger people maybe? Why are we still hearing about this when I have not seen good evidence that variants are more deadly or so on?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's partly the fear, right? I think it's hard to let go of that. You've lived for a full year under it. It's hard to let go. It's not. I mean, in some ways you can understand it, right? It's like we've been conditioned to be careful, and when the danger is gone, we're still careful.
Do you think the danger is gone? Where are we in that?
I mean, I think we're close. I think we're very, very close to that. Yeah. I think that in many places it is gone. Just paid at a high cost, of course.
Right.
But it's very close to that.
So Israel, with 50% odd vaccination, we're seeing cases decline, deaths decline, hospitalizations decline.
I mean, for the most part, it looks like. I mean, there's still some cases. I mean, it's an endemic disease. It's not ever going to get to zero. I think that's a fantasy. And so it will be with us essentially for the rest of time. Yeah. I think, just like the other coronaviruses are.
Right.
And we just have to make sure we understand who's at risk and really, I mean, I think start to lift the lockdowns, because the lockdown has been so harmful. Yeah. It's continuing to be harmful. My kids still aren't in school. I think that we're going to need to have a conversation about how to live with COVID.
Right.
Without this thinking like it's the worst danger on the face of the earth.
Well, so one of your things, Jay, that I thought was really, it was controversial, right? But also, in retrospect, probably correct, which is the seroprevalence study that you did early on got a lot of criticism, et cetera, with Ioannidis and how do you say John's last name again?
That's it. You got it.
I nailed it finally. And you guys had estimated the infection fatality rate somewhere in the 0.2.
Yeah, about 0.2. Yeah.
0.2. Where did it settle out, do you think?
0.2. Yeah.
So I think.
I mean, this is worldwide. This is one of these fallacies like the people sometimes have in their head. So like, there isn't a single seroprevalence number.
Right.
I'm sorry. There isn't a single infection fatality rate number.
Right.
There's a range of them. Some places had it worse and some places had it better. And for some places we had it worse for reasons we can understand, right? You had an older population. Its hospital systems didn't do well in managing the patients. It's early in the epidemic and we're killing patients with ventilators or something, right? So you can have a high infection fatality rate in that setting, and in other settings did quite well. Like, so for instance, and again, for reasons we understand, right? They manage the patients better. We have better inpatient, outpatient treatments. We're managing patients better. And so you have a lower seroprevalence, or you have a younger population.
Infection fatality rate,
is low. You get I keep making that mistake.
You're by the transitive property of seroprevalence to IFR.
I think it's like one over the other, one divide, whatever. You get the thing, yep.
Exactly.
So in any case, so the key thing is that there's this distribution, and some places they did well when we don't understand why, like Japan. The infection fatality rate number there is quite low, even though they have an old population. So we have this but the point is that there's this massive distribution. The median estimate, I think, is 0.2 worldwide. And I think the U.S. is probably higher because, New York and New Jersey got hit hard early and didn't do well. But I mean, Santa Clara County, April last year, it was 0.2. And in fact, there was another study done that included the Bay Area I think it was like ESRD patients, seroprevalence, I think in July or August, and it was 0.2 in Santa Clara County, or in the Bay Area, again, and later. So I think there's a distribution. I think we got that number right. Yeah. In April.
And so that tells you something too. It says that, okay, there's a fatality figure that's roughly, if we believe the flu IFR, which I'm not sure how accurate this number, so they're not.
I have no idea what the IFR is for the flu.
Yeah. I don't think anybody does.
Yeah.
Yeah. We throw around 0.1, right?
Yeah, but I don't know if it's right.
Yeah. Do you think it's lower or higher?
I have no idea.
No clue,
I don't know.
Yeah.
We don't actually, now that I've looked at it, we don't actually have very good seroprevalence estimates on the flu either, season to season.
Yeah, so incomplete data.
Yeah.
Because, the whole comparison with flu draws all kinds of knives out.
But I will say the one thing about the flu that we do know quite well relative to COVID is the age gradient. The age gradient of infection fatality for COVID is way steeper than it is for the flu, right? So that older people are much, much more likely to die from COVID versus young people dying from COVID. Whereas the flu, the age gradient is still upward sloping, but not as steep.
And I think this is a central piece to your whole approach of looking at this pandemic, which is a harm reduction approach across all sectors. So it's not just how many people are in hospitals, how many lives are you saving, you're looking at across everything. How many lives are you saving across a population? What happens when kids are not in school? What happens when you destroy economic livelihood? Because as we talked about last time, health is wealth. They are to some degree interchangeable.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't see any other moral approach to this, right? What is a lockdown? A lockdown is essentially an attempt to reduce the level of human connection, human contact. Well, what does that mean? It means essentially an undoing of a million things small things and big things that give our life meaning and purpose, that keep us healthy and strong, keep us sort of going. If you think about what the lockdown effects are, you can't simply just look at what affected on COVID. You have to think about what those kinds of effects are on every aspect of human life. And unfortunately, I think it's even worse than that. It's the effects, the negative effects of lockdown are worse on the poor than they are on the rich. The rich, we can afford to sit in Zoom and have people deliver stuff to us. But if you're, an Indian, a coconut water seller in Mumbai, and the country's locked down, you're forced to walk, 100 miles to go home, and your livelihood's gone. I mean, you're going to get hit hard. And there's now actually good data on this. There was a fantastic paper published out of a group in Berkeley that surveyed tens of thousands of poor people in countries in Africa and Asia, and they found enormous increases in poverty and enormous increases in food insecurity. The early predictions about that are coming true, about the lockdown effects on poor countries.
I'm going to say something that I think is we'll see what people think of this, but I think it's true. And I think you have to speak the truth as you know it. I think that there's a rich class of people, especially in the United States, that can absolutely not just afford, but thrive in a world where the in-person stuff is shut down for the majority of people. They're cheating often. They're having family gatherings, and they are able to make a living, actually a better living. In fact, the wealth inequality has increased during the pandemic. And they're the loudest vocalist folks when it comes to, hey, we should stay home and save every single life possible at whatever cost. What about the cost of lives and sanity and futures for children? The wealth disparity.
Yeah, I mean, I think the lockdowns have worked for one group of people. It's exactly the group of people you said, right? So I'll give you one statistic, right? If you look at LA County, the data in LA County, they have on the LA County site, they have age-adjusted mortality by zip code income. So like Beverly Hills, less than 10% poverty, pretty low poverty rate there. It has 1/3 the COVID-related mortality, age-adjusted, relative to the poorest parts of LA. It's 1/3, right? So the poor, who has borne the burden of this epidemic? It's the poor, especially in the lockdown. Actually, funny enough, in Florida, which didn't lock down, you have much more equal outcomes across income level.
Interesting. So rich and poor are equally affected.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the age-adjusted mortality rate is actually lower in Florida than it is in California.
Age-adjusted.
Yes, because Florida's one of the
older.
oldest, and California's one of the youngest.
So, and that makes me ask about, because again, you're what you're trying to do, Jay, and I think people misunderstand you. You've been vilified because of any association with Great Barrington, which was considered a taboo violation of the dogma that there's no such thing as targeted interventions for a pandemic because young people walk around spreading disease. But I think your whole piece is that these approaches that have been very heavy-handed are not equitable. They're not compassionate. And that's what drives you to go and continue to talk about it at great, personal expense.
I mean, I think the lockdowns have hurt basically every poor person on the face of the earth.
Yeah.
And I think what we did is immoral. And I think that is what's driven me to speak up, because I think there needs to be some voice speaking about that. And I think we could have done better, right? I think the reaction to the Great Barrington Declaration was, oh no, we can't protect the vulnerable. The only way to protect the vulnerable, the old, is by lockdown. Well, we see the lockdown hasn't protected the vulnerable. We fail, like 600,000 deaths. I mean, that's like, that's, we failed to protect the vulnerable. We have the lockdown arms in place that continue to lock down. Instead of engaging and saying, well, how can we protect them? Well, that's what I expected to happen. I expect the public health community to work together and say, well, okay, we haven't done a good job protecting nursing homes. We haven't done a good job protecting older people living in the community in multi-generational homes. We haven't done a good job protecting older workers. What kinds of policies can we adopt that would protect older workers? Let's give them paid sick leave.
Paid sick leave.
Yeah, I mean, let's multi-generational homes. I was on it's funny, like I was on one of the things we did in the Great Barrington Declaration said, well, why don't we make hotel rooms available to older people living in multi-generational homes? So some, their 20-year-old, grandson comes home and says, oh, I might have been exposed. Let's have a hotel room available for the older person, so that while you check to make sure it's negative, just like we do with hotels for homeless people, which is, I think, a good idea.
Yeah.
But the reaction, I actually was on a TV show with John Barry, who wrote this fantastic book about the 1918 flu. But his reaction to that idea was, oh, why do you want concentration camps for old people? I mean, what nonsense, right? Like, I instead of trying to constructively engage to try to protect old people, we just decided that we can't do it.
Yeah. And I think that was the biggest criticism. And then there's other more insidious stuff happening, which is, first of all, why did you even feel the need to do such a thing? Because I did a video where it's like, why are we even, because we had the dual declarations, right? You had the Great Barrington, and who was the other guys?
Jon Snow, yeah.
Yeah, Jon Snow. I mean, what is this, Game of Thrones? Like, are you guys going to take the black? It's like, whoever loses has to take the black and go north of the wall.
The irony is, Jon Snow, of course, is the famous sort of founder of epidemiology. He found out that cholera was coming from this, like...
The pump.
The Broad Street pump, right? So, the irony is, Jon Snow argued for focused protection. He said, let's not have like a broad lockdown of London. Let's just fix the pump.
Where
that's infected.
Right. So that's kind of ironic. But why did you guys actually feel the need to do that? Because it's an unusual approach.
Yeah. So I think we're seeing a few things at the time. One is that there was basically no one really arguing for this. I think a lot of epidemiologists, a lot of folks were uncomfortable with the lockdown approach, but very scared to voice their opposition to it. And this focused protection idea, it's not a new idea. It was old as the hills. It's still as old as the hills. It's what we used to address many other epidemics very effectively. So there's two things going on. One is we wanted the policy to change to protect the older population, and we needed to give voice to that. The other thing is we wanted to give protection to other scientists who were afraid to speak up at the same around this. And I think in some sense we succeeded at that. Like you started to see after the Great Barrington Declaration, more and more dissent. I think that's one of the scariest things about the epidemic actually has been this silencing of dissenting voices within the pandemic.
And this is important because if you believe the opposing side on this on Twitter, which is the majority of people who are vocal on Twitter.
Yeah, but not the majority, I don't think, of scientists, actually.
I agree with you, because when they talk to me, they're like, well, we can't say this because we're going to get,
killed,
deplatformed. Yeah. What they're saying is, no, but there is consensus. And this is not consensus. For example, I'll just list off things for which they say there is consensus. Now, I don't know whether these things work or not. I'm going to say what they are. Masks for everybody, closing restaurants, bars, schools, contact tracing. What else is dogma? Let's say
mass asymptomatic testing.
Mass asymptomatic testing. That's a great one. What else? What else am I missing?
Oh, let's not focus on the failure, shall we? I mean, I think that's. I think I've been trying to make sense of this, and I want to give folks on the who disagree with me their due, right? Because I do think there is a point to this, and like what so why this reaction, this sort of frankly overreaction to a plan that is again as old as the hills, like the Great Parenting Plan. So I think there's two norms that are competing with one another, and in one norm you have the public health, right? In public health, you have to have basically some somewhat unified message. Right. I mean, you have to say like, this sort of if you don't have that unified message, it can't be effective.
It's very tough. The public doesn't get the nuance and so on.
Yeah. And you're trying to communicate in a mass way. You're trying to say, you're trying to give as simple a message as can, as accurately as possible, that's consistent with the science, to get people to act a certain way. I mean, it is essentially a mechanism of population control, but a benevolent one, because you're trying to get people to act for their own health.
Right. You're shaping a system so people will walk along a path that makes some sense, that's
Correct.
Hopefully proven by data.
Right. And so their dissent is dangerous.
Right.
Right. Their dissent is it's edgy. You're cutting against what the public, you're sort of there's this sense of solidarity that you're cutting against. I think that's the root of the reaction of the Great Parenting Declaration, was this public health norm has been violated.
Yeah.
And obviously it was, because that's the point, right? The reason why is there's a second norm, and I think a more important one.
And by the way, you said the word dangerous. You said it's dangerous in public health.
I've gotten that 500 million times.
Yeah, because you've been called dangerous. Yeah. I've been called dangerous. I've had people text me saying, your skepticism of cloth masks early on was dangerous. Okay, so show me the data.
You were completely right. But whatever. Look, I think, so that's one norm. Right. Mm-hmm. One norm is this public health norm. The other norm is the norm of science. And in science, not permitting dissent is itself dangerous.
It is the worst anathema to the scientific approach and method.
Yeah. You have otherwise, how are you going to discover things unless somebody says, no, I don't think you're right. And then we have disagree. It's a dialectical process. That's what science is, right? Like, you think A, I think B. We disagree. We come up with C, and if C is true, then you're right, and C is false, I'm right. So we do an experiment. C turns out to be true, you're right, and I'm saying, oh, damn it. And then the next time we go on, and I say, no, A prime, and now we're gonna have another fight over A and A prime, right? I mean, it's just you have to have this sort of freedom to say B when you say A in science, or else science cannot advance.
Can't work.
And the public health norm is premised on a consensus, a well-known consensus on a deep body of science, or else it's immoral, right? You don't use public health as a mechanism of population control unless you have this deep body of science, this truth that really most people, we've now gone down this dialectical path and have arrived at something where we're pretty sure is right.
It's interesting that you mentioned public health and population control. Now that's going to trigger like a lot of people. Well, he's calling us population control. No, what you're saying is it's benevolent. I mean, you're asking a population to do something.
It's completely appropriate, right? When you have a consensus that really is solidly scientifically based. Right. So what's good?
Childhood vaccinations.
Exactly. Yeah. MMR vaccine is a godsend, right? And there's an enormous body of evidence that suggests it's a godsend.
Right.
And so the public health norm of not dissenting around that is very much justified. Yeah. Now there could be. I don't think so, but it's possible. It's science. There could be some piece of evidence that comes up that undermines that sort of consensus in science. In which case, the public health messaging ought to change.
Right. You update your priors and you change the messaging.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, but the science is the consensus in science is the moral backing for the sense that there's danger in dissent in the public health norm.
Yeah. That makes sense. And one interesting thing that I follow up on that, when you talk about public health being a kind of a population control, I don't know if you saw the Mercury News piece here in the Bay Area about they made public a Slack communication channel among all the public health officials here in the Bay.
I didn't see that. Actually.
It was fascinating. So Sarah Cody in Santa Clara and Scott Morrow here in San Mateo and Erica Pan.
I would love to see a discussion between them. Actually.
It's fascinating because they were struggling and wrestling with this is early in the pandemic, this new authority that had been given to them to control people's behavior. Like, we could shut down restaurants, we could shut down schools, we could shut down all non-essential businesses. Like, this is crazy. And they struggled with that. And at some point, Scott Morrow in San Mateo asks, so we're saying gatherings of 30 people outside is good. What's that based on? And they're like, well, we have to put a number on it, so we're going to put a number on it. I mean, it was chaos. And so I think this idea that this is some infallible science that we're then communicating en masse is not true. They make compromises. They have questioning it should not be.
Yeah. Well, again, the moral basis of that sense that there's dissent is dangerous in public health, the moral basis of that is true consensus in science. But you have a new virus. You have all kinds of novel interventions. There is no consensus in science, and I mean, especially last March, there was no consensus in science. I don't think now. I think just look at is it the CDC changed from 6 foot distancing to 3 in schools? I mean, that means 3 feet was okay all the way across. I mean, the plexiglass is no longer necessary. I've sort of lost track.
There's a million of them. Yeah.
I think science is changing on this because it's a new thing, and we're learning new things all the time.
And you know what's crazy? All this year of research, we've learned a little but not enough, because I don't think we've questioned hard enough. We haven't done real science hard enough. We haven't done cluster randomized controlled trials of masks.
Let's go back to the seroprevalence studies. Why was it like my group and a couple other groups doing the seroprevalence? Why wasn't the CDC systematically tracking this, or still systematically tracking it, frankly?
Right. It's like an operative central question.
Yeah.
And I think the other operative thing that you said is this is a gradient disease. So elders, people with chronic disease.
I mean, that's one of the reasons actually for the policy argument for the GBD, for the Great Barrier Declaration. The policy argument is that on many, many sort of different questions, it doesn't matter what the answer to them are. The focus protection idea is still the optimal policy. It's harm reduction, right? It's still the right policy. If the IFR is really high on average, as long as there's this gradient, you still do focus protection. Right. For instance, so it's invariant. The right policy option is invariant to many of these uncertainties in the science.
Right. So in other words, it allows for changes in data because there's a broad applicability to that approach.
Right.
And the question is, again, they'll say, well, what about the feasibility of it and so on? And now what they're doing is, I think there's this mission creep that's happening in public health, or maybe it's not public health. Maybe it's just
it's a fear.
A fear. And they're saying, well, but now younger kids with these new variants, we don't know, it's a little more infectious. Now school age kids, what if they get really sick? And, even though this thing has killed less than, or about as many as flu would kill in a normal year in kids, hardly any. I mean, again, that's not compassionate to the people who've lost children, right? But understanding from a population standpoint, if we keep creeping it, we will cause inadvertent harm that you will recognize. You'll go, well, but then so we're going to keep schools closed and do distance learning that's been harmful for the majority of especially poor children, right? And the only other thing I want to say about this is, when we talk about lockdowns, that's not one thing. We don't even know what that means. Like, when you say lockdown, what are you talking about?
Well, it's a whole suite of policies. And obviously, you're right. There's a range, right? So school closures, business closures, church, synagogue, mosque closures. Those are like one set of because stay-at-home policies is probably the sort of the furthest along that range. Restrictions on mass gatherings, recommendations that you shouldn't go over to dinner with other people's house even though they've been vaccinated. I mean, these are all like forms of law. Anything that's aimed at prohibiting human contact.
Yeah.
Is a form of a lockdown.
Lockdown policy. So then let's segue. That's a nice segue into vaccine messaging currently. All right. As you mentioned, and I continue to mention, these are incredibly effective, almost miraculously effective.
They are amazing.
Particularly the mRNA.
Can I say one? Sometimes people ask me what I got wrong. I'll tell you, my mea culpa. I did not anticipate in March of last year that it was at all possible to produce an effective vaccine in the time it did. It's absolutely true.
That's such a politically awesome answer. Is that what did I get wrong? Why I didn't predict the miracle of vaccines?
I did not, but that's just honestly, that's the actually, I was trying to think whether that would have affected my thinking in March.
Right. Oh, well, let's dig into that. If you knew that this vaccine was coming, would you have been more amenable to saying, well, then lock everyone down until we get there?
Yeah, I think. I think that's the obvious. Like I know the vaccine's coming day after tomorrow.
Right.
Fine.
Right.
The vaccine's coming in 10 months. I still think the lockdown is the wrong answer. right? You still do focused protection in the meantime.
Because of the ancillary harm.
Yeah, because of the ancillary harm. The lockdown harms are absolutely enormous, and you cannot ignore that in the policy calculus. The other thing is the inequality of it, right? So for 10 months, rich people can't afford to do this.
Yeah.
Poor people cannot.
Yeah.
And you can't blame poor people for that. It's just a fact of life.
Yeah.
And you don't design policy around asking people to do the impossible, which is essentially a 10-month lockdown policy.
Come on, dude. They got $1,400. That's the equivalent of let them have cake.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh my God, it's even worse, right?
It's worse, yeah.
And that caused a huge revolution in France, if I understand it correctly.
I believe that heads were lost.
Apparently, yeah.
Decapitations and defenestrations, people thrown out of windows.
But so I think the answer still is focus protection if it's 10 months. If it's 2 weeks, then it's different.
Yeah, and the other, the other issue with that, then let's dig into that a little more. We now have vaccines. So I think people would say, well, now there is a finish point. Let's keep everybody under wraps and do everything we've met. That's the double masking thing and all of this and these variants. Let's get as safe as we can until we can get everyone vaccinated. What do you think of that?
It's the same exact problem, right? There's more actually. So first it's a failure of focus protection. It's continuing the lockdown harms, right? Schools still are not open in California. Poor children are the ones that are suffering the most. And not only that,
poor children. There we go. My OCD. The mic was a little crooked. I had to do something. I had to make an intervention. Focused microphone intervention, people.
Oh, dear.
Anyways, so back to what you were saying.
I mean, this is like you're inviting like amateurs to your professional podcast. I don't know what you expected to happen.
You're a pro, dude. I saw you on Dr. Drew.
Oh God,
I was on Dr. Drew too.
Okay, so you have these like you have this like situation where you have this fantastic vaccine, and you've sent this message that your life will not change even if you take it.
Yeah.
Are all surprised that people are saying, "What's the purpose of the vaccine? Is it any good?" I mean, it's the worst. It's the most anti-vax message I've seen in my life.
It's so anathema to actually having people get the vaccine. Like, look, you and I are both vaccinated. I mean, what kind of sense of liberation did you feel? I mean, and again, you're less worried about COVID.
I wasn't particularly worried personally about COVID because I've done the risk calculator. My risk was like 0.2. I mean, my IFR was 0.2. So I'm 50. My IFR is 0.2. Every 7 years of age, you double the IFR.
So you did your math.
Yeah.
See, mine
I'm
is
52 actually. So
old man.
I know.
I'm
Really.
going to be 48 this month. So that tells you what my risk is. But I also have two clotting alleles. So I have factor V Leiden and
prothrombin. So then you're going to be higher than me.
Exactly right. So that's why when I got the vaccine, I was like, oh, good. I am not going to die of a massive pulmonary embolism that's induced by COVID.
Right.
Not by the vaccine, which we'll talk about, but by COVID. So that the reason I felt relief with that vaccine is I knew that I could go back to doing a lot of things with other vaccinated people or people that are low risk because I'm a doctor and I've looked at the science.
Yeah.
If I listened to the public health apparatus, I would still be...
Well, they're aiming for zero risk in every activity or surrounding around COVID, while at the expense of all the other things in your life that are not around COVID.
Right.
It's just so it's irrational, right? It's monomaniacally focused on a single risk, minimization of a single risk. But if you do that, you're going to harm other things in your life that are probably more important to you.
Yeah. Yeah. And one thing I will say is this pandemic has been good in the sense that people are always talking about, we got to get back to normalcy. And I'm like, I don't know about y'all, but normalcy kind of sucked before. Like we have a broken way of doing things in the world. So hopefully when we get back, there will be a little bit of improvement in, we've had time to spend with our families a little bit. Is assuming we're rich and we're in the Zoom.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are some things that are good for the lockdown. I mean, I just like the if we actually can figure out a way to make work from remote work for many people, that's actually a good outcome, right?
It's pretty good, yeah.
So I mean, there's some potential. We should go back and look for lessons. Yeah. That's one of the things I'm going to be doing is trying to do research on the collateral effects of lockdown. I think that needs to be documented. And so if you go to a website, collateralglobal.org, there's a project I'm working on to try to start to document that.
Quantify that.
Yeah.
Well, so there's a little mixed information come out on that. So for example, suicide CDC reported we're actually down in 2020.
I saw that 4%, but on the other hand, suicidal ideation was up enormously, right? Up 25% in the 18 to 24 category last year.
Yeah, and I just interviewed a psychiatrist, Judd Brewer, who said his practice has been just overwhelmed.
Well, I mean, I
anxiety.
think there's this like mass anxiety. Everyone's felt it. I don't think anyone in the audience hasn't felt it to some extent or other. It's just
the social contagion, right? Yeah.
And I think it's surprising that the suicide rate is about the same as it was.
Yeah.
But that shouldn't change how you think about that. I mean, we should start. We need good science on this. Is the point, right? We should like figure out what we should count the cost, right? And I think that's part of
what you're trying to do.
Yeah.
So one thing I think I got wrong is I was thinking that there was some existing natural T cell immunity that would have caused cases to rise in young people in the winter, but not deaths. And then deaths rose, and I was like, well, I was not right about that.
Yeah, well, we have still failure to focus protection. Older people still got...
It's still
majority. 80% of the deaths are 65 and up in the U.S.
That's the statistic?
Yeah.
80%?
I think it's something or other. It could be 70 something.
It's high enough that if, like you said, a focus protection would have saved, if you could pull it off.
Yeah.
But concentration camps for old people, Jay.
What nonsense.
But I think it's that kind of like... It's almost an ad hominem to say something like that. Because the minute you start making references to Hitler, Nazis, and et cetera, you've already lost the argument.
Didn't there used to be a thing in the internet, as soon as the first person that makes the reference has lost the argument?
Has lost the argument.
Yeah.
It seems to happen routinely.
Yeah.
So I got the T cell thing. Is another interesting thing is now India is getting their second surge. And have you looked into this at all?
A little bit. I mean, it's still, the death rates are still incredibly low. The IFR is still incredibly low in India.
Yeah, just large numbers of people.
Yeah, large numbers of people. But I think what happened in India is the poor population was the first surge,
right,
and the rich population is the second surge
because they're opening up and they're
it's incredibly unequal in India.
Yeah,
right? The lockdowns were essentially. They couldn't enforce them in the poor population because you just would kill them.
Right.
And so they lasted for like 15 seconds.
Right.
And the disease spread everywhere. Right.
Right.
I think there was a Mumbai survey in the Dharavi slums in I think it was like August or September of last year, and it was like 60% of the population. I mean, really, really high fraction of the population had antibodies.
Right.
I think, but that was the poor, right? And I think now we're seeing, I think a lot of poor countries, I think we're sort of seeing this residential, in poor countries, there's this like residential segregation between the rich and the poor, and one population is infected in one way and another population is infected in another way. That still needs to get sorted out, I think. I still haven't seen good stuff on that as yet, but that's I think the primary hypothesis.
Now we talk about vaccine messaging, the vaccine messaging around pausing Johnson & Johnson, pausing AstraZeneca for what we're seeing is these very rare clots, which I've done shows on. Roughly in America, we see so far about 1 in a million risk, typically younger women, age 18 to 48, 49.
Yeah.
Is pausing the vaccination campaign the correct approach?
No.
Why not?
I mean, it's again, another failure of public health messaging. If you want to create vaccine hesitancy, do what you just did. Tell people this is a dangerous vaccine on 1 in a million event.
But shouldn't we be hesitant? I mean, 1 in a million event?
I think the right thing to say is what we've found. We found that it'll be more than 1 in a million because it's but only a little bit because it's in the under 50 group, whatever that population size is, 1 in 700,000, whatever it is.
Right.
You have 1 in 700,000 risk of this blood clot. Here's your risk of COVID. Right. You can decide what's right for you.
Yeah.
If you're over 50, it's 0 in a million.
Yeah.
And here's your risk of COVID, which is really high
Yeah.
if you were to get sick.
So it's easy.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of messaging would go along. People are not stupid about this. You just trust people to make the right choice by giving them information.
So heaven forbid, Jay, that we tell the truth. And honestly, I did a show exactly saying this yesterday, a live show where I said, let's talk about risk and COVID. And in Europe, AstraZeneca, they did a calculation, I think in Brits in their 20s, it's a 1 in 100,000 risk of an adverse event to that particular vaccine based on what and I didn't look into the primary data, but their risk of COVID ICU hospitalization varied. So it was anywhere between 0.9 in 100,000 and 6.8 in 100,000, depending on whether they were an essential worker, what their socioeconomic status was, what their zip code was, all the things you talked about. So making a decision depends on all those kind of things, right?
Yeah.
And now, and in the setting of having another vaccine too, the mRNA.
Well, we do this with other vaccines, right? So we risk stratify for MMR. We say, look, if you're 70, you don't need an MMR.
You don't need an MMR. Exactly. That makes sense. That makes perfect sense. It's just like, when I see a 90-year-old put on a statin, I always scratch my head a little bit. What quality of life you're saved are we doing?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can trust people to make the right decision if you give them good information, but whereas if you try to like just, I mean, I really regret that they paused this vaccine. It just doesn't make sense based on the data, at least that they made public. I mean, of course, they could have some private data.
That's right. Yeah. We don't know. Yeah. My sources say that's not true, though. Yeah, that this is what's public is largely known. Okay. But I would say this because believe me, if I knew something that the public didn't know, it would infuse into my messaging. Yeah. Because I don't care. Yes. I just want to tell the truth. And so that vaccine piece, I think we've bungled it because we throw this idea of variance in. And this is a partially public health apparatus, partially the press. But these new variants, for example, in Israel, there was a study that Israelis who were vaccinated with the mRNA vaccines were more likely to be infected with the South African variant. Did you look at this data?
Okay, so this is nonsense.
It's
right?
Idiotic. Yeah.
Right. So like the key question is the same question. If I get the vaccine, am I protected against death and hospitalization from the variants or from whatever? And the answer is still yes. The answer is yes to that question. It's still protective against the outcome you just don't want.
Right.
So why on earth are we scaring people around some like uncertain thing? Much of which is produced based on these modeling studies that I just don't trust anymore.
Yeah.
So I think it's
they're bad studies.
Yeah. I think as a general thing, we should be giving people information based on things that we know that they care about. We know they care about death, and we know they care about avoiding hospitalizations. We should all care about that, right? Mm-hmm. It makes sense. And the evidence that I've seen, anyways, to date about the variants is that the vaccines still protect against those bad outcomes.
That's right. That's my interpretation of the data as well. And what's interesting about this study that got pulled into the press by Reuters is that there was 5.9% of the infections in the vaccinated group in Israel were the South African variant. Much lower in the unvaccinated. Yeah. Duh. Yeah. That's from the New England Journal of Duh. Why is that? Because if you have a vaccine that's really good at stopping wild type virus, when you have a variant, the only way you're going to get infected is with a variant. Yeah. And then you're only going to be a case, not a fatality, not a hospitalization, and it's going to be higher than in the unvaccinated population that can just get infected with the garden
variant. Same thing with the fraction of the young people the fraction of cases among young people are increasing. I saw a New York Times article on this.
I saw that too.
As if we're like, we're vaccinating the old people. What did you expect to happen?
What's going to happen?
Yeah.
And people are appropriately going, hey, maybe we should start getting back to business here and hanging out with our friends and stuff. And they're young people and their risk is low. And, now they're not going to affect grandma because grandma's vaccinated, presuming that grandma is vaccinated.
Yeah.
Now, at this point, people should have the information to say, okay, I'm grandma. Well, I'm not going to get vaccinated.
I think 80% of the American population over 65 has been offered the vaccine.
Has been offered it.
Yeah, and I think it's on the order of 80% have got the first dose in. I mean, we've done an incredible job in vaccinating the old. We should be celebrating. Instead, we're like something on that order.
Would you call that targeted protection?
It's focused protection. I didn't want to point it out, but we in the vaccination campaign, we kind of adopted the Great Barrington Declaration, didn't we? And that's really good news.
Do you remember when Stanford residents threw a fit because,
But you know what? That was okay. You know why? Because they actually see old patients.
Yeah. No. I agree.
Yeah. So
I thought it was okay, but it was interesting because it was the young revolting and saying, why are these old attendings who don't even touch patients getting the first?
I was offered it actually when they made that mistake because I'm a professor at Stanford but I don't see patients.
You don't see patients, right?
And I sit alone in my freaking office. And there's no way in good conscience I could get before my mom. So I just waited until she got vaccinated before I got vaccinated.
Yeah. When I decided to do it, I was waiting too. When I decided to do it was when I heard that the place that was doing the vaccinations, 40% of people were refusing it, declining it, healthcare workers. And I was like, okay, I'm taking your shot.
You should take it,
I am taking your shot. Right. Yeah, because I see guests. It's a responsibility.
You have risk factors. I mean, I think I mean, I don't want to be moral or moralistic about this. I think we all have our own sense of like propriety about what's right. But I just couldn't do it until my mom was vaccinated.
I think that's fair. Yeah. And that reminds me, our messaging. Oh, you've had COVID. Get yourself vaccinated. Stat.
What on earth?
Why?
Like, these are immunity deniers. That's who they are. They're
immunity deniers.
Yes.
Are you, man, you need another declaration. Like, just pick another city that'll get pissed off that you made a declaration about. Like, how about the Santa Cruz declaration?
I mean, on that business of I think somewhere on the order of 120 to 170 million people in the U.S. have had COVID infections. Based on depending on what you think the IFR is, you just take the number of deaths divided by your estimate of the IFR, and you get somewhere in that order.
Right.
Up to half of the American population has had COVID.
Right.
Or infected with COVID. Right. So if that's true, why would we discriminate against them? Why would we tell them the thing that they had to suffer through to get to immunity counts for nothing? What is the reasoning there? I don't understand it.
The variants.
I see.
Yeah.
No, but natural immunity protects against the variants.
Yeah.
Again with the severe disease from the variants, right?
Right.
So I think that, which is again the key thing.
Yeah, it's very perplexing, and I think a part of this that I think you've talked about or would like to talk about, because I would like to talk about it too, is how if we say this kind of thing, already YouTube has put a flag on this video, Facebook's put a flag on this video.
Well, this was the danger. I told you this might happen.
And I accept it. It was like you slapped me across the face with a white glove. D'Artagnan, I challenge you to have me on the show. I'm like, yeah, let's do this. I mean, what do I need $10 in ad revenue for? It's an interesting conversation because who's making those decisions as to what's misinformation, right? And I'll tell you, I mean, Vinay looked into Vinay Prasad is a mutual acquaintance. He's been on the show. He said he looked at it. It's people who have big Twitter presences who've already taken a stance on something. That's who they recruit to be their fact checkers. And of course, they're going to disagree with Dr. Great Barrington and his crew.
I mean, I think again we can go back to our early part of this conversation. Like YouTube. I had a conversation with Florida Governor DeSantis.
How dare you? He's a Republican.
I mean, okay, there's a few of them, I guess. So you kind of still have to do public health there, right? The conversation, one of the topics of it was pretty wide ranging. It was on TV. It was on like the Florida TV channels, and then it was a pretty wide ranging conversation about COVID policy going forward, vaccinations and so on. And one of the questions that the Florida governor asked me was, should children wear masks? So I've looked into this, right? So you can read the CDC guidelines, you can read the World Health Organization guidelines. They disagree, right? So the CDC says mask over age 2. World Health Organization says mask over age 5, right? If you read the reasoning, what the World Health Organization does a much better job with the reasoning than the CDC. But like what they say is. There are lots of harms to children between 2 and 5 from masking. So the key developmental stages that might get missed, language acquisition, so on and so forth, right? And for over 6, there's still harm, right? Social and emotional development are harmed by masking, they say, or at least potentially.
I believe it, yeah.
But then
intuitively, but I don't have data.
Yeah, well, that's what they say. I mean, I believe it too. So I mean, I'm not a pediatrician, not a development expert, right? But it's consistent with what I learned in med school.
I stayed in a Holiday Inn Express yesterday.
Exactly.
I'm basically Piaget at this point.
Right. But in any case, I mean, there's some harms from it, right? On the other hand, what's the benefit?
The benefit, yeah.
The benefit is slowing spread of disease. Well, I mean, what's the literature say on this? This I actually have read a lot about. So like from the Iceland study from early in the epidemic, kids are very inefficient spreaders of the disease, just straight up. They're just for reasons we still don't fully understand. They may have high viral loads in their nose and they're still not spreading the damn disease, which is fantastic news, right? That we should act on. Right. Sweden, they've had children in school age 1 to 15 and preschools for the whole epidemic without masks. And the teachers are at lower risk of bad COVID outcomes than the average of other professions.
So the children are protective in some way.
Yeah, and then no kids died either.
They're absorbing all the COVID and keeping it down low.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, I don't know what it is. I mean, whatever it is, like these are facts that are in the scientific literature that suggest that kids are not a huge risk of disease spread. Yeah. That's just a fact.
It's been consistent.
Yeah. Right, and there's a ton of studies that now show this. The other thing is like you ask a 2-year-old to wear a mask. I mean, I've had 2-year-olds. They're not. I mean, they're gonna. I mean, they don't. They're not going to wear a very effective. And you know, even 11-year-olds, they're running around. They're not going to wear a mask effectively. Like you can't ask them to do that and judge them on the fact that they're being kids when you tell them to wear the mask. They don't wear the mask. They just are. Not going to wear it right.
And they're masking kids during sporting events and things like that.
Yeah, and so where like people you have it down over the nose because you have to breathe. I mean, it's just actually the World Health Organization is explicit about this. You shouldn't wear masks during exercise. Okay, so I'm looking at this. I've looked at this information. I do a very simple. I'm a health economist. I do a very simple cost-benefit analysis. Very little in the way of benefits and some costs.
Yeah. So why do it?
So I said no. You shouldn't mask kids. For that, YouTube pulled the video down.
Really?
Yeah, they censored the whole video, the whole hour and a half conversation.
They pulled the whole thing down?
Yeah. And it was posted by some local news station. So they're like censoring the news. And then NBC wrote a story saying that it was effectively that it was good that they censored the whole conversation.
Of course NBC did that, yeah.
Like I didn't realize news media were in favor of censorship again. I mean, that's news to me. I mean,
yeah. Well, I'll tell you what, I'll speculate why, because NBC would get more clicks on an article that's politically polarizing than they would on one that's milquetoast facts. That's just how the media is paid. It's unfortunate. They're good people in a bad incentive model.
Yeah. I mean, it's a strange situation. You have a governor, you may like him or dislike him, but he's trying to like show you through this conversation what advice he's getting and the basis for the decisions he's making. That's good government, right? Like when you
transparently,
right,
yeah.
right. So like again, you may disagree or agree, but now you know what the base of his decision making, right? So or at least some of the basis of his decision making,
right?
Why would you censor that?
Yeah,
I don't understand. Like it's a misapplication of the public health norm.
That's exactly right. That public health norm, which says it's dangerous to dissent from what the messaging is, but this is not what that is. This is policy and science and decision makings based on not just what data we have, but what our values are, and looking at the big picture of cost versus benefit across multiple sectors, which is what you're trying to do when you influence policy.
Exactly.
I mean, heck, dude. Look, no matter what people think about whether you're right or wrong, you have to understand that the approach is correct. If there's something they disagree with in your approach, well, then they can criticize you and go, I don't like the fact that you go on Dr. Drew and say this. Like, oh, okay, fine, I'll take that criticism too. But the idea behind it, I think, is unimpeachable, but it's being impeached. That's the thing.
It's really strange. Yeah. Like if they have you said there was like some intern or whatever doing this, right?
Yeah.
Like if maybe they have some algorithm, I don't know, to flag it.
I'm the victim of algorithms a lot. Yeah,
but okay, fine. But that's not the right norm, right? If you have a counter argument to make, YouTube essentially has editorial standards,
right?
And the editorial standards essentially say science can't happen here.
That's what's happening. Yeah.
Right. And so if they don't like what I said,
yeah,
and they have reasons, they say, Jay, you missed this study. Jay, you got the cost benefit analysis wrong. Jay, you did. I mean, that's good science.
Yeah. Contradicting
what I said with other science, and then we can now have a conversation and a discussion and a debate. It's the dialectic playing itself out.
Right.
But that's not what they do. They just say, look, what you said was dangerous. We're going to make sure the public doesn't see it.
It's nuts. I've said this many times. There's some crazy crap that comes my way, Jay. Like I'm sure you get your inbox full of stuff, crazy, but I get stuff. Can you debunk this? Can you debunk that? Can you debunk this? And I just take one look and I go, this is conspiracy level DEFCON 1 garbage. I would never dream of censoring it. Let it be out there and let whoever wants to debunk it. I'm not going to waste my time because I don't want to give them more platform and it's not big enough. But when something does get big enough, then I'll do a video and say, I think plandemic is wrong. This is not a thing, or, whatever it is. And that's how it ought to be done. And then you present your case and people can decide.
Yeah. I mean, the norm, let's just take it out of science. Like the norm in American democracy has been, how do you counter bad speech? More good speech.
Good
right?
speech, yeah.
I mean, I think that norm ought to be. It's actually really a wise norm. Let's have that back.
Sam Harris has said this. When you start censoring speech, you remove our only ability to resolve disputes without violence.
Yeah.
Speech is how we do it.
And John Stuart Mill had this. I read it in like 5 million years ago, and it's still with me. Like if I'm wrong, and I say something wrong, well, I've done you a favor because I've given you a chance to refine your thinking about why I'm wrong. Mm-hmm. You've done me a favor by giving me good information that I might, potentially change my mind around. It's actually improved the entire conversation. The dialectic is a really valuable thing to arrive at something closer to the truth.
That's right. It's an iterative process. And you need other human beings, preferably in person, by the way, but if you have to do it by Zoom. I've done videos on one. I think Zoom is, there's actually data now on why it's less effective, especially in group collaborations, because we have two types of synchrony in, like you and I, we can see each other right now in person in unlimited bandwidth. Whatever, limited by consciousness, right? So it's consciousness limited bandwidth.
In my case, very limited by consciousness.
Well, hey, both of us are primates barely out of the soup, but I'll say this. We can read each other's body language. We can make eye contact. We know when to take turns when we're talking, although I talk too much and I interrupt. And we synchronize our ability to exchange information. On Zoom, what happens is we get, according to this data, we're so focused on the visual cues that we ignore some of the subtle auditory cues and body language cues that allow us to not either dominate a conversation or be dominated and speak a turn, particularly in groups of more than two. And that's why the argument is turn off the video and just go to audio only, and it's more effective.
More like a phone call.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. So, again, these are the things we'll learn from this pandemic that will science this up and make us better, right? Because I don't want to sit in traffic again, Jay. I don't want to travel and do talks. It sucks. Like, I like doing my talks from here.
Yeah, I mean, in some sense, that is something that we're going to get out. I mean, I think that ability to work away from home, at home effectively is something we have learned a lot about in the pandemic.
Right.
For some professions.
Telehealth a little bit too, I think.
Yeah, that could be. That certainly could be. I mean, I think if we're honest, we'll do and science will be honest about this. Like what a full set of investigations, some of which will produce some good outcomes from the lockdowns, much of which I think will produce bad outcomes.
Right.
But I think we need the full scope.
To understand it. Yeah, exactly. And we need to, that means you can't have censorship. You have to have open dialogue and you have to assume good intent. I think that's another problem. I sometimes fall into this trap when I see one of these doom bait people online and they're like, well, the variants are going to kill us all. Like there's a particular person on Twitter, which we can talk about, not the person, but the behavior on Twitter that just, it's an epidemiologist. They'll take any opportunity to spin a very fearful monologue. And the question is, who is that helping? If first of all, I think scientifically they're wrong, but let's say even they're correct. Is that the approach that's actually going to motivate behavior change? It's not. It's being honest and having a dialogue and understanding and actually even saying, well, there's multiple sides to this. On balance, I think this.
Yeah, I mean, I think. I was thinking about this. I'm a little bit hesitant to do this because I'm not sure I fully believe what I'm about to say. But I think they're kind of, at Stanford we have this like fundamental standard. The fundamental standard is like a standard of how behavior that says how should we treat one another at Stanford, and it basically amounts to something like the golden rule, right? Which is a ubiquitous standard for a reason.
Yeah.
Twitter, in addition to arguing that academics and scientists on Twitter should adopt the golden rule when they're talking about other people, I think there's another rule I want to add to it. Don't say something you wouldn't say in a referee report. Right? Because that's the norm of scientific discussion and debate, right? It takes usually place behind closed doors, but actually I think it's healthy that it takes place outside closed doors, so the public can see it.
Yeah.
Because it's a good debate. It's a debate focused on facts and just disputes about how to interpret facts, pointing out of errors in fact. I mean, all kinds of things. I mean, which is annoying if you're trying to respond to them. But it's actually good for science, right?
Yeah.
That's the kind of debate I think a responsible scientist should seek out on Twitter.
Right. And so lacking the ad hominem attacks, lacking what bothers me a lot on Twitter, I think Vinay's talked about this too, is that you have a scientist who's advocating a very strong political position. Like they're vote for this candidate. I mean, more or less just putting it out there. And then the very next tweet is lock everything down or open everything up. And everyone who thinks otherwise is murdering grandma. And it's like, well, you've already poisoned the scientific discourse by openly politicizing it, ad hominem use, and violating the principles that you talked about.
Yeah, I mean, again, this is, I don't want to like moralize this because I don't think my particular approach may be not right for everyone, but like I've never donated any money to a political candidate because I don't feel comfortable, or a political party. I just don't feel comfortable. I have to opine on health policy. I would like to reach all people, whatever their political, because I'm trying to find facts, and I've tried to convince people that these are facts that don't have nothing to do with my particular political beliefs, which frankly are not that interesting. I just don't care that much about politics.
Yeah.
I've never, frankly, before the Great Barrington Declaration, ever signed a petition before.
Yeah. It's funny because petitions are like, the concept of it is just so off-putting to me. And yet there you did it because you believed in this idea.
Yeah. Now I've signed a couple. So like there's that, and there's a couple on like free academic freedom I've signed. But those are like, I have to tell you, like every time from the Great Barrington on, every time I sign a petition, I'm like, okay, am I compromising my ability to persuade people about something, some fact I found?
Right. And I think that's a valid concern. I think you should have that concern always. Like in my profession, whatever that is, I call myself alt-middle. Like, and that doesn't mean I'm a centrist. It means that I have this radical, an unusual commitment
to piss everyone off.
To piss everybody off, exactly.
Well done.
Exactly. To hear all the sides and make decisions, and then present it in a way that isn't overtly. So if I'm politically biased in some way, I'll say, okay, here's my bias. Now you may disagree, and this is why.
Well, I don't mean to butter you up, but actually I've been watching a lot of your videos since we spoke, and I've watched a few before that. I mean, you're actually quite good at that. Like you're trying to reach people you wouldn't naturally agree with. Right, I saw that. And I think that's the right norm for scientists to have. We should aim at talking to everyone, regardless of politics. I mean, in some sense, like in the scientific discussion around COVID, especially in elite circles, there's been this like bigotry against Republicans.
Yeah.
And I think it's really been harmful both for scientists themselves, because now what